and get this party started.
And thank you all for your time for a special session, second session in June.
Christina, should we go ahead and kick it off?
These two.
Good evening and welcome to the June 25th monthly meeting of the Boston Civic Design Commission. This is our second monthly meeting in June, which has been scheduled to accommodate a larger quantity of projects under review by the city. This meeting is now called to order. My name is Linda Eastley, co-chair of BCDC, and I'd like to first thank all the BCDC commissioners for donating extra time this month and also to continuing to shape our city into a more beautiful, sustainable, and equitable city for all its citizens. The open meeting law requires that we notify you, the public, that an audio recording of this meeting is being made by commission staff. And we have a quick reminder of upcoming meetings for commissioners because they are a little different for the month of July. Our July monthly meeting will be on the second Tuesday in July, which is July 9th. And our July subcommittee meeting will be on the fourth Tuesday in July, which is July 23rd. We have 4 projects on our agenda tonight, 2 that are here for votes and 2 that are new to us. And we'll go ahead and start with a roll call. Commissioners, if you could say present as I call your name. I believe Amy Chambers is not with us today. Jonathan Evans.
Present.
I think Diana also is not with us today. So Shauna Gilly-Smith.
Present.
David Hassine.
Present.
Nick Young Kim.
Present.
Kathy Kotaritas. Has Kathy joined us yet? I don't see her. Mimi Love.
Present.
David Manfredi.
Present.
Bill Ron.
Present.
Laura Solano.
Present.
Kirk Sykes.
Present.
And myself, Linda Eastley, present. We will be doing our minutes approval at our July meeting, actually. So we'll move on to a report from the review committee and introduce our 2 new projects, which tonight are Northeastern University's Institutional Master Plan and also 262 St. Botolph Street, which is part of the Northeastern campus. And a quick note that Commissioners Love and Manfredi are both recused from these 2 projects. So with that, Christina, can you give us a little more background on the projects themselves?
I'd be happy to. And just wanted to acknowledge that ex officio member Diana Fernandez just joined the meeting.
As did Commissioner Kotaritas.
Great timing.
Great.
Per the regulations of Article 28 of the Boston Zoning Code, BPDA staff have prepared the following recommendation for this commission's consideration. A proposed 10-year institutional master plan at Northeastern University seeking Article 80D entitlement contemplates development of approximately 2.2 million square feet of new construction and approximately 935,000 square feet of renovation. The IMP contemplates the development of 8 buildings, including 6 academic and research facilities, 1 dormitory, and 1 multipurpose athletic facility. The multipurpose athletic facility, located at 262 St. Botolph Street, also known as Matthews Arena, will seek simultaneous Article 80B entitlement. A joint IMP/PNF for these entitlements was filed on June 14th, 2024, and the Northeastern University Task Force hosted a public meeting on June 17th, 2024. BPDA staff recommend at this time that the Commission vote to review these 2 proposed projects.
Thank you, Christina. Typically, we take these votes one at a time, but I think since they're related, okay to do just one vote tonight?
Yes, the same commissioners are recused for both, so.
Great. All right, is there a motion to review?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith?
Aye.
David Hassin,
Aye.
McYoung Kim.
Linda, I apologize. I think I have to recuse myself from this. So,
Okay, from Northeastern. Okay,
From Northeastern.
thanks, McYoung. Kathy Kotaritas,
Yes.
Bill Ron,
yes,
Lara Solano.
yes,
Thanks. Kirk Sykes,
Yes.
and myself, Linda Easley. We will review, looking forward to seeing those 2 new projects later on in our agenda. So we'll go ahead and start our presentations tonight with 2 projects that are back in front of us, the full commission, for a vote. We will first have 2 Charlesgate West, and Commissioners Love and Kim are both recused from this project. So we'll have you both do your audio and your screens off. That would be great. And a quick note, this is a project, the 2 Charlesgate is a project that's at the Gateway site in Boston. So for tonight's agenda, we've asked for a little bit more time for discussion. And a reminder that Commissioners Gilly Smith, Manfredi, Ron, Sykes, and myself were at the last subcommittee. So we'll have you all share your comments first after the proponent has finished their presentation. And I think for the UTIL team, we are ready for you to start the presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And if you could also make Emmett Gregory a presenter, that would be wonderful. Thanks. And I'll start sharing my screen if that's okay.
Yes, Emmett Gregory also is already elevated. Please let me know if you're unable.
Yep, I think
Okay.
we're all set. Yeah, thank you.
Great. All right. Good afternoon, commissioners. Thanks for your time this afternoon. We have been through a couple of subcommittees. We first showed this to the full commission back in March, and we're really excited to be here. As a quick summary, this project is located at the intersection of Charlesgate and Boston Street in the back and across from the Back Bay Fens. It is 400 rental apartments and includes 68 on-site affordable units. So that's 17%. And we've, as I said, gone through a few meetings here. We had the full commission meeting back in March, a few subcommittees, including one just last week. I think we have very slowly whittled down, or very quickly actually whittled down, many of the comments that we got. I do really think that the project is quite a bit better now than it was back in March. So I really appreciate all the comments that we've gotten so far. I think there are a couple elements we want to review with the full commission just to show you our progress, and a few things that we continue to work on collectively as a design team, but also interfacing very directly with BPDA design staff. And those are, really considering the massing and facade of the low-rise portion of the building, which I think was well received at our subcommittee last time around. And then focusing in especially on the massing and the treatment of the mid-rise portion that negotiates that height between the lower element and the upper tower. Just as a quick point of review for everybody, this is, Linda, as you mentioned, a gateway site. It's a really rich and complex site. It sits at the intersection of, or this hinge point between this Olmsted idea of 19th century urban planning, the high spine, which kind of was this more 20th century idea of urban planning in Boston, and is also a hinge point between the Charles River Parks and Commonwealth Avenue Mall and the Back Bay Fens, and is a kind of entrance point to the Emerald Necklace. And so there's a lot of interesting things going on here. And it's also a gateway moment into the Fenway neighborhood generally, and then kind of the Back Bay Fens as they frame the Fenway neighborhood. And it forms a part with the Pierce at the other end of the Fenway, as well as we think Building H for Northeastern along Forsyth, that all 3 of these buildings will have a kind of dialogue as taller markers on the skyline and the cityscape. I wanted to very briefly review the overall project massing. In addition to it being a very rich site, it's also very complex in terms of its zoning and park ordinance and many different factors that are influencing the shape and massing of this particular project. But for us, it's really boiled down to three primary elements here. The first one is creating a very generous public stair that connects Ipswich Street on the lower level adjacent to the turnpike with Boylston Street and Charlesgate and the Back Bay Fens, and really trying to celebrate that as a very grand, very public moment in the city, and that building really kind of being secondary to that gesture. The second is interfacing with our pre-war neighbors all along Boylston Street in terms of its massing and materiality, and that's this element that you see in the lighter red shade. And then creating a taller element that is in communication and in correspondence with that high spine along the turnpike, and really figuring out how we negotiate the massing between the low-rise element and this high-rise portion. So I'm going to hand it to Emmett to very briefly review where we are with the landscape.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. The landscape design was inspired heavily by local materials, specifically Roxbury pudding stone, which can be found all throughout the Emerald Necklace. The stone has a unique composition, and we've tried to play with it at a few different scales in the landscape design. Next slide. We have three major goals for the landscape: to enhance what is currently a very vehicularly oriented experience along Ipswich Street, to create a key link between Ipswich and Boylston with the public stair and elevator, and to create a compatible edge along the park to the east. Next slide. At the Boylston level, we see the idea of the pudding stone like boulders or stones that are set within the landscape. Some are set flush with the paving, while others become natural outcroppings or seating elements. We also see the entry to the public's elevator lobby, as well as the public restroom that's being proposed. Next slide. At the Ipswich level, the large natural stones carry down the stairs onto the Ipswich streetscape. This unites the site and serves as a nice wayfinding element. We also see here the entry to the elevator on the Ipswich level, as well as the opening of that building corner, which Brett will touch on a little bit more later. Next slide. Back up at the Boylston level, the planting areas frame the residential entry and help cut down on the hardscape area, which was a comment we heard from you all. We also see the connection to the stair and elevator on the right, which we've really tried to make feel like a prominent and primary movement through the site. Next slide. At the public stair, we've broken down the scale of the wall by introducing a lower planter, matching the language of the historic wall. We've also pulled back the upper wall to introduce a second layer of vegetation. Above the upper wall, you see the windscreen. We're hoping to dematerialize the windscreen so that it recedes visually and doesn't really feel like part of the wall. And then on the building side, the modifications to the corner really makes the public stair feel more visible and connected. And I think I'll let Brett talk to that a little bit further on the building side.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Emmett. One of the comments that we heard from the commissioners when we first introduced this project is that the public stair felt a little bit canyon-like or more slot-like. And so we've worked very hard both in the landscape design to kind of step that wall, but also in the building design to try to open up this corner as much as possible. And so since the first commission meeting, one of the major moves here is to actually cut away the corner of the building, which you can see in this floor plan here, and really try to open up this public elevator lobby so that it feels just as public and just as open and inviting to traverse that grade change as the public stair is. And we're really trying to reinforce that with the materiality. So bringing some of those, the granite material, some of the Roxbury pudding stone, as Emmett mentioned, into that elevator lobby so that it feels much more connected with that public stair. And then just a slightly different view here along Ipswich Street. So you can really see that, as you're walking from the west and rounding that corner, that stair is much more open, much more connected with the experience of walking along the street. All right, I'm going to turn to the building design now. And I wanted to start with some of the massing investigations and alternatives that we've been doing with the subcommittee and with BPDA Urban Design. In our subcommittee work, there was a lot of focus on this mid-rise element, this element that kind of bridges the difference between the low rise of Boylston and the high rise along Ipswich. And where we've landed is we really want to create a massing that helps, that kind of steps and terraces up from the low rise facing the park towards the high rise facing Ipswich. And you can see in this diagram over here on the left that there are kind of consistent steps. So the low rise is 60 feet. We take a step up to 120 feet and then another step up to 180 feet. And finally, we get to the top of the building at 275 feet. One thing I'll mention, and we've talked about this in subcommittee, the overall height of the building has been very heavily negotiated with a lot of different stakeholders. This being a prominent site, a lot of people are very interested in it and have different points of view, different concerns about how this development sits on the site. And so the parameters that we have to work on are kind of limited. And I wanted to also highlight that relative to some of these floor plan diagrams. So you can see, we're really trying to fit within the geometry of the site, which is somewhat unusual and in kind of trapezoid shape. And moving from the low rise up to the high rise, you can see how the building starts to step up and become more of a kind of tapered form at the top of the building. The other thing I wanted to mention overall is our facade treatment and thinking about how different facades can be reflective of the neighbors and how that transmits to the facade of the upper portions of the building. And so overall, we've developed a kind of vertical bay facade strategy inspired by our neighbors along Boylston Street. And that gets applied to all of the east and west faces of the building. So you can kind of see that in this plan diagram. And then on the north and the south faces of the building, it gets more of a kind of tectonic expression of the units and of the overall massing of the building. We've also been exploring this in physical model form. And, I know we're all kind of in the Zoom world, but we very much have been working with this as a kind of physical model and wanted to make sure that we included some photographs for everybody. That's a big part of our exploration with this design. So I'm going to start with the Boylston wing and kind of our analysis of some of these of the pre-war neighbors all along Boylston Street. They're quite varied, even though they present kind of a very consistent approach to the street front. There's a consistency in horizontal datums, and yet they kind of step up and down as you run along the block. At the south end, it's lower. At the north end towards our site, the buildings get higher. And then there's a very prominent kind of vertical bay format for these buildings as well. But again, not so much consistency in a kind of ABAB. They're all over the place in terms of their spacing. But the entrance portal also is quite a prominent element, even if it is very differently articulated on each of these buildings. And so what we've landed on the Boylston facade is one that is very much inspired by that vertical bay spacing. So you can see we're breaking up each of these bays into a more vertically expressed element with a base, a middle, and the top. And trying to follow some of those horizontal lines that we see picked up on the neighboring buildings. So there is a stone base and then a kind of articulated with projecting bricks on the first floor. And then a little bit of a gentle cornice line picking up on some of the rhythm of that neighboring building as well. One thing that's kind of interesting and was quite prominent for us in our takeaway from Boylston is that the impact of the neighbors is that there's very much a kind of crenellated facade or a kind of interesting skyline effect. And we wanted to bring that through in our design. And so what we've done on those vertical bases, we've also slightly inflected them in plan so that you can see here that you get that same kind of jagged edge along the skyline so that there's, a correspondence to our neighbors. We're, still trying to be very much contemporary, but be very much calibrated in terms of the building height and some of the treatments of the datums for each of the buildings. You can also see that there's, some fine detailing that we're starting to develop here at the stone base with a little bit of an inflected moment at each of these bays, really to try to reinforce both the rhythm of the Boylston Street facade, but also bring a richness to that street level detailing. And then here's just kind of a view, a little bit more view and elevation. And you can see here, our residential entrance is articulated in a red sandstone, kind of riffing on the stone base of the neighboring buildings without using the exact same materials. And just zooming out a little bit here, you can see both the Boylston elevation as it rounds the corner and then meets the tower. And that same vertical bay with the inflection in it starts to manifest itself on the tower itself. And so you can see on the high-rise portion, those vertical bays are expressed now in a crisper white brick. And then also even on the mid-rise on the east and west facades, that same inflected bay gets put onto that mid-rise piece. And then also on the tower, I just wanted to point out that we are including a vertical projecting brick along this edge that aligns very carefully with that cornice line of our Boylston wing, which then in itself aligns very precisely with the parapet and cornice of our neighboring buildings. And then just taking a step back, looking at the bigger moves of the massing, we wanted to point out that, we're trying to introduce this kind of stepping form from the low rise of Boylston up to the mid-rise elements before you get up to the top of the tower. And I'll talk about our treatment of the penthouse in just a moment. And that's also reflected in some roof decks, some common area roof decks that will be on each of these terraces, and try to introduce some of the greenery that exists in the fens and see how that steps up the building as well. We know that we need to, be polite about how these roofscapes work, but we think it's important that there's this idea of greenery stepping up the building so it feels a little more tied with the overall character of the fens. And we're just continuing to walk around the building. So this is a view from across the Muddy River. And you can see again some of that terracing and the treatment of the vertical bays here with a slightly different expression on the south side of these bays as the building kind of cascades down from the taller tower down to the lower rise. And now circling around to our view from Lansdowne Street with that same treatment of the stepped massing. And then finally, the view from the north as you come in from the Boca overpass off of Sturrow Drive, trying to create a very classic and thoughtfully detailed building. So some of our materials that we're proposing here are a light colored soldier course brick that gets implemented in a kind of pleated facade and then extends up to the penthouse level with a more articulated perforated metal penthouse. So you can see on this facade detailing some of those soldier course bricks. Those move in and out relative to the floor slab. And then the window, those are all in plane. And so what you get is at the window bays, which are doubled up, a kind of copper toned metal trim that shows the depth of the facade, and then that's repeated up at the penthouse level with a perforated copper panel on one end that mirrors that orientation of the window trim, and a white perforated metal that kind of mirrors the brick paneling, and all of that is capped with a very crisp kind of knife edge roofline detail cap to the parapet. So I think Seth will tell me that I'm right at time, hopefully, and I'll end it right here and welcome all of your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett and Emmett, for a really clear presentation, and appreciate you picking up on many of the items that we had brought up in the last subcommittee and in the other subcommittees as well. So there were 5 of us that were at that last subcommittee, and we'll go ahead and give the 5 of you an opportunity to kick us off with comments, and then open the floor to the other commissioners and certainly to the public after that.
Are we doing raised hands?
Yes, you can raise your Zoom hand and then go from there, but go ahead, Shauna.
Yeah, I think that I thought it would be good for me to step in, since I think I may have been the only person who is at all 3 subcommittees. So first of all, I wanted to compliment Brett and Emmett for the responsiveness throughout the whole process, clarity and responsiveness. The first subcommittee meeting, there were a number of items with respect to the landscape, a clarification of the overall concept, also comment of strengthening the connection, the conceptual connection and spatial connection to the emerald necklace, a level of spatial simplification, and most significantly, the relationship of the stair, the opening of the stair and making it feel more public. And I think all of these moves were addressed quite significantly in the design. I think we've lost the image, the presentation.
I think that was my fault. I wanted to make sure we got to see you speaking. So
okay.
I apologize.
But most significantly, the pulling back the building to make a very, very wide connection going up the stair. And also the thing that we haven't discussed as much, making the accessible elevator connection at the top very, very visible and prominent so that the accessible connection is also strong. The thing from a landscape perspective, the thing that we haven't talked about so much, and that I would like a level of clarification on is the materiality, tectonic, and character of the windscreen. I think that's an element that's sort of flowing under so invisible it's flowing under the radar screen. And then with respect to the architecture, I'll let my colleagues discuss it, but I will say that the proponent has been very responsive to the comment and tried multiple different strategies in response to the very different comments and suggestions that have been proposed by a range of commissioners.
Thank you, Shauna, for those comments. Thanks, Brett, for bringing our image back up. Appreciate that. Bill, I see your hand raised.
Linda, if it's okay, maybe I could just address one of Shauna's questions about the windscreen. So Shauna, that's a great question. What we have proposed is a painted steel windscreen. We have gone through the wind tunnel to kind of verify the various sizing and opening percentage required. It is an item that will require further coordination with MassDOT, so I don't think we're quite prepared to explain exactly what it is yet, because that's going to get tied up with their work with the new bridge overpass, but something certainly that we'll continue to work with staff on.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you. Bill?
Yes. One quick question, Brett, and then I do have some comments. The space between I'll call it the southern end of your building and the adjacent Park Avenue apartments, is that the space there because you could not connect those, or you did not want to?
Yeah, correct, Bill. So there's a light and air easement on the property that prohibits us from building in that space.
Okay. So at the committee meeting, I raised some questions about the mid-rise element. 2 weeks ago, we were calling it the bustle, and I don't mind that word has now moved away from the project. But I raised those issues because I honestly think that the building has had the potential for becoming one of the finest residential buildings built in the city in the past decade. I think the basic bones of the building and the basic moves were have been so well done, particularly the site plan, the pathway, the steps up, connecting two parts of the city, and the high-rise elements are just really fine. I had pushed hard about the mid-rise element because the so-called bustle vitiated, if you will, the clarity of the building and slightly compromised the building in that respect. And I think, as you could tell, Brett is very articulate about the intentions, and I understand that a flat bustle might not have been the right solution here. I think the stepping is interesting, but I worry about the clarity of those in the design. So I wanted to say that while disappointed that clarity is not in the project, perhaps I don't want my faint praise to take away from the fact that the other elements of the building are so outstanding that I want to express an enthusiasm about a yes vote for the project.
Bill, thank you. Are you talking about the kind of
the mid-rise?
Yeah, the mid-rise, the new design that Brett shared with us tonight.
Yeah, which I've only seen tonight, and I mean, the nice thing is the element added to the building. The top of that mid-rise element is significantly lower than it was at the committee meeting a week ago. That's a good thing. I worry about the lower half of the mid-rise element, which it seems a little bulky to me, but if the other simpler mid-rise element just did not work in the building program, then I'm willing to accept what they've shown tonight.
Thanks, Bill.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure I was understanding what you were saying. Yes. The wedge shape that sits under the bustle. Yeah, great. David Manfredi.
Yes. Well, I too like the building very much, and I think it's gotten stronger, and you've been very responsive. I think it will be a very handsome building. There's a new clarity for me, I guess, especially on I'll call it the north side, in the fenestration pattern that seemed more chaotic before, and now seems like you've got a kind of centering element that lines up with the mid-rise, and then a corner proportion. The narrow elevation that faces east is really quite wonderful. I guess it actually the one we saw faces west. We saw it from Lansdowne. It is really very handsome. I would ask you to go to a very early slide where you showed the progression. And I'm going to go back to the mid-rise. And I agree with Bill. I'm glad we've lost the bustle word. I wonder if, and by the way, I think you've responded and you've made progress. I wonder though if there's not one too many steps. That there's now 4 steps, and if there could be 3 steps, the lower, I'll call it the low rise that belongs to the existing street wall, the mid rise, which is I'm not sure how many floors that is where it says 120 feet, and then the 180. That geometry disappears. That seems to be trying to make to mediate between the rectangle of the tower and the triangle of the base, and I don't know, seems almost a fragment to me. Whereas, by the way, I something doesn't seem right about your heights, but I get your intent. 120 looks like it's not 260s, but that's okay. If I look at floors 7 through 12, I wonder why you don't take floors 7 through 12 and make them whatever you have to get back your square footage. Say it's 7 through 14 or 15. It seems like one too many, and the steps get very small. The base has enough scale that it stands up to the tower, And then the two pieces in between feel like a totally different scale. And I think if you made it one piece, the three would be more compatible with each other. I do have a question. I'm very interested. I think you're now you can go to any one of the perspectives that is close enough that I can actually see the brick. And I'm wondering, so I'm assuming that this is two questions. One is, so is the brown also brick, or is that a precast, or is that a brownstone?
Yeah, so let me explain the different components here. So there's a red sandstone and then there's brick. And so what we've articulated here is the red sandstone base and then a brick with projecting courses, which is similar to our neighbors. It's not quite as dense as we're showing here, but inspired by that more rusticated, call it ground floor, the neighbors. And then picking up, all of the neighbors have this kind of limestone base between the first and second floor. For us, it becomes a continuous sandstone element, and then a sandstone sill that continues just at these upper floor windows, and then it's brick for the rest of the way.
And is that the same vertical brick as on the light colored brick on the tower?
No, so we have a running bond here because it's a running bond on the neighbors. And then we have a transition moment here where it kind of has an accordion fold and then becomes a vertical brick at the tower. And we're trying to use these projecting vertical bricks as that mediating element to bring a little bit more light and shadow and texture at the base to align with the low bar along Boylston.
So I don't, so the two comments I want to make. I made the first one. The second one is that joint. You've done so many good things here. I love the consistency. You've taken this geometry of an inflected plane. You've interpreted it at street level in relationship to the historic street wall. You've reflected it in the tower. And of course, it all comes out of the geometry of the site, and you've taken it consistently around the building, and it is really very nice for its several time reiteration of the same geometry, but at different scales, in slightly different materials and slightly different detailing. And I think that's really to be commended. We see an awful lot of buildings, I think, that try to do too many things. I don't know that, I don't even know exactly what my comment is on that joint, except that the panel that is parallel to Charlesgate is thin, and I don't know what the detail should be between the two parts. You're treating it as a reveal, and maybe that's right. You've got two planes that come together, two I don't know what angle they are, but I'll say they're 60 degrees that come together on a reveal. And I'm picking on something that's very small only because I think that the rest of the building detailing is so strong. And I know you've picked that up elsewhere where those panels come together that way. And maybe you've got the right thing. I just think that's a difficult corner, and I don't know, assure yourself that you've got it right. But I do think on the massing, I think it would be stronger with one less step.
So let me just go back to the slide we had up earlier, because we did have a study with a single step over here in the lower right corner. And just in kind of dealing with our cap on height and the geometry of the site, making sure that we could get the units we need to make this viable, it felt like it was a little bit too tall. And so that's where we went to this one, where it's a little bit, the top 4 floors are shaved off. And it does become 2 stories taller than here, but we were trying to kind of mitigate that sense of the massiveness of that lowest element of the mid-rise. And I think you're right. Our scale is a little bit off, but I assure you the numbers are right, even
Yeah.
if the
Okay.
diagram, the hand-drawn diagram's a little bit off.
Okay,
But
yeah.
thanks for pointing
No,
that out.
I'm not, I guess I see I like the drawing in the lower right because I see those as three different equally strong pieces, and each holding their own. And my fear is that the two middle ones in your final feel like of a different scale. But look, I think this is a really nice project, and very carefully detailed, and hold on to all that.
Thanks, David. I wanted to pick up on something, Brett, that you just said, and just tell you that we're really appreciative of you and your team for turning around a lot of this work in a very short period of time. That's tonight, including a lot of these alternatives. So thank you. Kirk, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I had the pleasure of being at several of the meetings that preceded this one, and a lot of great work has been put into this effort. You know, there's no getting around how both challenging and important this site is, and I think you've endeavored to embrace that. I think there are undoubtedly people who feel the scale is challenging, given its presence on the Fenway. It's a building that's seen from many faces and presents itself quite attractively to several of them. We spent the majority of our time in committee, I think, on this view appropriately because of the transition from the low-rise context and climbing up to this gateway element. And it is a gateway. It's a gateway to the Fenway. And in that regard, it's not an easy one to solve. And I think it's also one that could be solved many ways. You've integrated a lot of the things we talked about. You've done a nice job of evolving the base and interpreting the bays and the texture of the street. You've done a wonderful job at the transition down the stair. You've brought greenery into the upper levels that you've introduced, whether there are 2 or 3, which is something that we thought might be something of interest. And I think this can continue to get better with guidance from BPA design staff. I don't think we're going to make it go away. I mean, I think this is all premised on our embracing a tall building or a taller building in this location. So I've come around to believe that I think with continued evolution and maturation of this particular view, without ignoring the other views to the other neighborhoods that surround it, that this building actually can continue to get better and to be the great building that it can be to mark this location.
Thanks, Kirk. David Haseen.
Has everyone who was at the last subcommittee had a chance to speak?
I can add some comments at the end, David. I think everyone else has, yes.
Thank you for the presentation. And I wasn't at the last subcommittee meeting, but certainly have been a part of the previous meetings. And I want to concur by saying I think that the team has been extremely responsive, and I do think that I'm glad to hear Brent feeling that the project has been strengthened by the process, because I agree. I was particularly concerned about the base building. I think you've come up with a very handsome solution to the continuity and framework of that low-rise block. My only comment there would be that as you develop the materiality further, think hard about the relationship of the colors between the existing buildings and the new building. How necessary to its reading as a contemporary building is a sharp change of color. I'm not sure. And that's something that I would just, as you go through in later stages, would ask you to look at. In terms of the mid-rise element, when I saw the diagram, I was really a bit skeptical, but I think that this view shows the possibility of a cascade approach in a potentially flattering light. I think that the roof gardens and so forth are key to that, and I do wonder, you know, I could imagine refinements that would make this feel like it's cascading a little bit more. But that being said, I know there's a lot of discussion that's happened about this, and I think that the consensus that I'm hearing amongst all the commissioners is lower is better, and that the more that the tower breaks free from the low-rise buildings, the better. And so at this point, I would be inclined to ask the team to continue to work with the BPDA on, you know, again, whether it's the clarity of David's one-step suggestion, which I saw and liked as well, or if it's about refinements to this. But I think that what's nice is the fact that the tower really breaks free from the low-rise elements in this view. And, you know, to me, this is very much a Boston condition of a tower with a clustering of, or a collaging of building forms around its base. That feels like something we see throughout the city. And in that sense, I think it feels authentic. I probably would agree that I think, you know, one step of the kicked out version that may drop that another floor might feel cleaner, but I think that we should, I would suggest that we probably leave that to the project development with the BPDA, because I believe that the team has already made so much progress in improving the building. And it's beautifully detailed as well. So that's my take on where we are. So I'm very appreciative of where we've gotten here. And I do think the view that's looking back towards the city, Brent, if you've got that view, the one where you're in the Fenway, no, not that one, the view from the Fenway looking back towards down. Like, I think there's something really interesting and attractive about that. And I frankly do like the idea, if we could have one step of just catching the top of the Prudential Tower from this very orienting view, which is the Fens. You know, we talk about preserving the views of, you know, the Park Street Church and the view corridors that we have across the city, and you know, the top of the Peru is a thing. So that might be something to consider as you do that last level of refinement on that mid-rise zone. But I think it's looking good. That's all.
Thanks, David. I see Diana and Laura's hands up, and then we might go ahead and wrap up and shift to public comment after that. Diana?
I just want to appreciate the team's work here. We've been following this project along, and I think it's really great to have a team that's been as responsive as you all have been to some of the comments and studies we've requested. Following up on David's comment here about materiality, I think there is a really good point here just about the sandstone introduction and the difference between that. And I think the stone expression that you have on your tower and the base on the Ipswich side. So if I'm reading your images correctly, there seems to be more of a sort of granite or marble sort of stone detail at the base of the tower versus the sandstone that is sort of tying into the neighborhood fabric. So just thinking a little bit about how are those two bases sort of relating to each other, and is there an opportunity to kind of tie some of the base elements associated with that residential frame and brick texture that allows the two pieces to speak to each other. And I do think that David's comment is right on. It's, you know, it is already contemporary, will feel different. You know, does the material expression, is the sandstone the right sort of material to consider here? I also do want to note and highlight that what I think is really powerful about some of your earlier diagrams is how contextual this has been. how this is drawing from many of the elements that we have been working on as part of the Boston Design Vision, specifically about context and that pace and texture of a neighborhood that are so important to what makes our city so special. So we really do appreciate seeing that context being brought into the BCDC environment, and hope that this serves as an example for other proponents looking to contextualize their projects within a broader neighborhood.
Thanks, Diana. Laura.
This is, I think I missed a meeting when this was last presented. I saw it in the very early stages, and it's really looking terrific. And I like how the landscape has calmed down quite a bit. It's not trying to work too hard. It's sort of recognizing that just down, across the street is a really amazing, beautiful landscape. But could we go to the plan view? I had just a few clarifying questions on the steps. So you're showing stones in the steps here, and I know there was even discussion about them being pudding stone. Mm-hmm. They're not shown in any of the perspectives, is that right? Or am I missing them?
Or are they flush?
They're meant to be flush, yes, with the stairs. So it'll be a material change. So yeah, they're shown there. I see.
It's impressed in
Correct.
That. Okay,
Correct.
I missed the subtlety of that. They're not.
So it's not an obstruction in the stair. Yeah, correct.
Got it. Okay. And then the other thing that I'd like to understand is, and I don't know if you have a view from the sidewalk, kind of looking through and up to the steps. Oh, good. That's perfect. That went by fast for me, and I just wanted to make sure that there really was that connection that you all were talking about. And then the only other thing I'll say is, I hope the planting gets to be more robust. I have a feeling some things were peeled away for the sake of the architecture, but I hope that some of the intensity across the street makes its way here as well. But otherwise, I think it's really terrific. It's become very simple, and in that way, very elegant. So I appreciate the work.
Thanks.
Thanks, Laura. I know we want to leave time for public comment. I'll add a few comments that haven't been brought up already. Every time I see this, I notice more beautiful details. So really appreciate this team kind of looking at that level. I, like Diana, have really want to applaud this team on thinking so carefully about context, particularly with the base. And when we reviewed that last week and just understood how you were bringing some of that adjacent vernacular across the base of this building, it just really helps to fold this into the context of its place in the Fenway. We didn't talk about the top in our comments today, but I think that that's one of the changes that will be incredibly meaningful. And I think as you've been playing with some of those inflected planes throughout the building, and then so cleverly taking that technique up there to the parapet. And I'm not sure if the copper wraps around to the Boylston side of that tower or not, but I think that this is a really beautiful detail. And given that you'll see this building, as you're coming down the pike and other places, I think that that will be really well received. And then two other comments. One was just piggybacking a little on Laura's comment, if we can go back to the stair. And I think that this contribution to the public realm will be really great. My ask is that there may be an opportunity for more planting or a living wall or something along that, what I think is the east side, so that area as you're coming down and up the stairs doesn't feel so cold. And I know that you'll have that in shadow a lot of the time, but I trust that this team can be thinking about the different plantings that might occur there and make it actually a bit of a, vertical garden. I think it could be a lovely way to get from Boylston down to Ipswich. And my last quick comment is actually on the view from Lansdowne Street. I didn't see a slide number for that one. Yes. So I think we've talked about this a little bit tonight in our comments. And I guess when I saw this image, what struck me was kind of the verticality of the Prue, of the low rise, and of the tower. And I just would love to see this team continue to work with BPDA staff and see whether that mid-rise where you've got kind of the two bays, both on the Boylston side and almost on the Lansdowne Street side, whether testing that coming all the way down and interfacing with the wedge in that different way could help the reading on this side. So those were some of my comments. Christina, do we want to shift now to public comments?
We would be happy to. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function, and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Edward Quinn, Fenway CDC, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi, yes. Thank you so much.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Edward Quinn. I'm a real estate project manager at Fenway Community Development Corporation, and want to let everyone know that we do support this project. We're a neighborhood-based organization working to preserve the Fenway as a vibrant, diverse neighborhood, and we also have representation on the IIG for this project. Fenway CDC has had positive experience with the proponent on their previous bond project, both from an approval process perspective and how it has been operated post-completion. The project site has long been a dilapidated area, and we feel that this project will be a great improvement to the existing conditions. It'll also bring critical benefits to the nearby park system, add much needed affordable housing to the neighborhood as well. It's our feeling that the design of the building and adjacent street and park areas, the proponent has tried to strike the right balance while preserving the financial ability to move forward, and we look forward to seeing the progress on this project. No further comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Edward. Sarah had their hand raised, but no longer. We'll move on to Frederica Begley. Freddie, are you able to unmute yourself?
Okay. Hi, thank you. I've been to a lot of these meetings, and I really respect the professionalism, and I'm learning a new vocabulary by sitting through these meetings. There's really been a tremendous improvement on the palette here, the project that the BCDC was given, and that's encouraging to see. But the real problem is the elephant in the room is still there, and that tower is still too imposingly high. That there is too great of a schism between what the BCDC is asked to design and the realities of the restrictions that exist on the property right now. And I think it's an unsatisfactory process because there's such a great divide between the zoning that is, it's so far removed from the reality of the zoning. It's so far removed from the reality of the parkway ordinance. It's so far removed from what the BRA actually even envisioned for this site not very long ago. So it's given the fact that the BCDC has been given the parameters or allowed to design something within the parameters, or that the BRA is accepting the parameters of the proponent on what the proponent agrees is feasible. We're talking financially feasible or what, but if that's kind of not the way the city should be planning things. Because we were all involved with the planning process and invested a lot of thought, and so did the BRA on what it envisioned for this site and for what it envisioned the neighborhood. With this project, it's like, well, forget it, it's changed and we will make it work. I'm not satisfied with that process, and I guess I voiced it all along. But to get to the design of this, the elephant is still in the room. The tower is too tall. And this is a precedent, and we cannot, even the BCDC cannot opine in a vacuum. This is creating a precedent for the value and the scale of the parkways that was enshrined back, 100 years ago.
Frederica, I'm sorry to interrupt you at this time, but the 2 minutes have elapsed.
You can see the research. I just saw it.
Thank you for your comments.
And actually, Christina, if I could respond, I believe Freddie brought up some good comments that have been brought up previously as well during other subcommittees and during the initial presentation of this project regarding the zoning for this district. And at the start of the project, the zoning context was provided, which indeed for this site, it identifies it, as Brett mentioned, as a gateway site in the Fenway, but the height identified for this specific site was indeed lower than this proposal at 135. Like many projects that the BPDA sees, including projects that have had planning studies, we consider the merits of each project, looking at the specific context that they sit in. We analyze the impacts, environmental and otherwise, that they create, and in certain cases, we let proponents move forward to vet projects that may be beyond zoning in BCDC, and ultimately this project is not eligible for a PDA, so would be subject to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and it would need to go in front of that forum as well to ultimately get its final zoning relief in order to achieve what they're showing here.
Thank you, Seth.
Members of the commission, at this time, I'm seeing no additional raised hands. So we'll consider the comment period, public testimony period closed.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Seth, for reminding us of that background. So commissioners, for next steps, do we have a motion? David?
Yes, I very much respect the comments that were made by the public, but that notwithstanding, I think that the proponents have definitely worked hard within our process. So I would like to suggest that with further refinements to the mid-rise portion to be worked out with the BPDA, that we move forward with an approval.
Thank you, David. Do we have a second?
I will second.
Thank you, Bill. All in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith? Shauna, you might be muted.
Aye.
Thank you. David Hussein?
Aye.
Kathy Kotaritas?
Aye.
David Manfredi?
Aye.
Bill Ron?
Aye.
Laura Solano?
Aye.
Kirk Sykes?
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley, aye. You are approved. Congratulations.
Thank you, commissioners. Have a good afternoon.
You too. All right. Thank you all. I think we're ready now to move to 295 West First Street. I don't think we have any commissioners that are recused from this project. So Christina, can you invite Commissioners Love and Kim back in for this one? And during our comment period, we welcome Commissioners Love, Gilly-Smith, Steen, and Sykes to kick us off because the four of you attended our last subcommittee, so we're eager to hear your thoughts. And with that, I think we're ready for the PCA team to start their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for having us back. So we're going to walk you through, I think, some, substantial changes that we've had since the last time the full commission has seen us. Next slide. So just to orient you, this is in South Boston, and it's a through block site. It borders on West 1st Street and West 2nd Street and East Street on the east side. It is, not a far walk from Broadway and the T station. Next. We've highlighted here, we saw the commission in February. We went to subcommittee in March. And then we spent actually some time with the BPDA kind of reorganizing some of the upper levels of the building, which you're about to see. We went to subcommittee, last month, and we're back here today. So just to say, when we first came, we were 250 units, and we were along West 2nd Street. We took the approach that, these streets are very different. Where we about West 2nd Street, we have one kind of face, and then where we abut West 1st Street, which will be TBD. Obviously, it's parking lots today, but will be something else. So the different vocabulary is the approach to the building. But we had 4 to 6 stories. You can see along West 2nd. We had a open space, and then 6 stories along West 1st Street. Next slide. Through a lot of work together with the BPDA, we essentially redirected the character of what is along West 2nd Street to basically carry the character of what was approved adjacent to us at 270 West 2nd Street, which was a 4-story building with a 5-story, setback. We have this open space, which we got a lot of comments about, which we're going to get into. But you can see that essentially the geometry is about a 6-story building with a couple of wings off of it along West 1st Street. Next slide. And the spirit behind this is, that people living along West 2nd Street shouldn't feel that 6th floor. So we worked very hard. You can see in the lower level, that 6th floor is set back almost 140 feet. It's not visible. You can't experience from West 2nd. And a little bit further down the block is the upper image, right? Where, as a pedestrian, you can't see it. Next slide. And so in the upper right-hand corner is, we brought this forward. We heard several things. We heard this seems like a jumble of 2 or 3 different building types of varying heights. Our proposal tonight is that on the left-hand side, you can see that what we believe is our expression along West 2nd Street is 4 stories with some differentiation with a 5th story setback to another 5-story building that fronts on the yard. And then halfway down the block actually transitions to be 6 stories. Next slide. We had some real questions here about our activation, of the open space. We had concerns about the bike room location on West 1st Street, and the community room. Was it going to activate it enough. People didn't understand why we had our major lobby on the north side of the building, northeast quadrant. And next slide. So we worked very hard to shift things around. So around this new open space that we created and have redesigned, we now have a community cafe. We now have our major lobby expression, which arguably is, closer to the T up on Broadway. We've moved the bike room, which people were concerned, was dead space along West First Street. It is challenging to both screen your parking and have, this bike room, but we've moved it along East First Street and kind of bookended it with an active use with the community cafe and our, let's call it our secondary lobby, because of the size of our building, that's on the corner of West First Street and East Street. It's at the end of what amounts to an alley between West First and West Second Street. And then, people were thoughtful and asking us, like, what is this community use? And I'd like to tell you, we have them defined. What I will tell you is we've been in touch with this, the BPDA and the city about what this could be. And what we thought was the best way to approach it was to create a space that was very definable, flexible, over time. And so you can see that it's much more continuous along West First Street. Next slide. These are images along West Second. The one in the upper left, our context is the 270 West Second project on the left-hand side in the upper left, and the existing, buildings in the, on the right-hand side. The basic dimension of that space is 18 feet to the curb line. We have mature trees that currently exist along West Second Street. We moved the building back between 18 and 25 feet along West Second Street to ensure that these existing mature trees can continue. In the lower left, we previously had exterior transformers and things that might restrict pedestrian access. We now have, a very robust setback, and you'll notice a commitment that we have to engage with local artists. There is one area where we do have our utilities, electrical rooms, things, because our transformer is now recessed. And we will work to make that as pedestrian friendly as we can. And in the lower right-hand image, the building in the forefront is a historic building. It's called the Foundry, 70 feet tall. And there we are in the distance. And so I think you get some sense about this mitigating open space, and then this 4 to 5 story building that will live along West Second. Next slide. This is a view up East Street. Again, just to be in the lower left, it's over 13 feet to the curb, new street trees. A change that we made to the whole ground floor around the building is we changed it to brick masonry for the whole first floor. All our piers are brick masonry, and we've reduced the scale of that sort of intervention at the corner, the recess. We heard from folks about that, but you can see that the break in plane between the two building heights occurs sort of mid-block at that alley. So we started 6 stories at the corner, move halfway down the block, and where you can see that it steps, that's essentially where the alley comes through. You can see the 70-foot tall, Foundry building on the left. So we tried as much as possible to be in context, with that existing historic building along the open space.
David,
Next.
I wanted to flag the time for you. You have just under 2 minutes left.
Sure. This is basically unchanged from what we showed you before. Next slide. Our courtyards, we had never shown this to you before, but they are, concrete pavers pulled away an interior to these courtyards, away from the units themselves and abutting, next slide, our amenity spaces that open out onto them. Next slide. In 2 different locations because we have 2 different courtyards. Next slide. Next slide. So we came, and there was a lot of discussion at subcommittee about a lawn, the character of this. Is it surrounded by something that's not activating it? Next slide. And as now you can see on the left-hand side is the lobby and the entrance to the building, a community cafe, which you can see has some communing possibilities with existing. The nature of the ground floor. This is an image of the ground plane and the plantings to create multiple areas where we can gather. And the next slide is in the lighter green and the medium green are, added tree canopy. The lower level along West 2nd, those are our mature trees. Obviously a heat island problem down in this area. Next slide. Is to create a character that feels like it's part of the public character of the building. A cafe on the right, the entrance to the building on the far left. Working with the BPDA, we stripped away some of the unnecessary detailing, added the brick to, essentially we think create a place that's welcoming, to the community. How'd I do? Did I get in under the wire?
You just made it.
Okay, I knew I was close, sorry.
Thanks, David. Appreciate the presentation. So commissioners will kick off with our comments, and just a reminder that 4 of you that are present today were at our last subcommittee, so we'll give you the opportunity to go first. That's Mimi and Shauna, David Hassine, and Kirk. Mimi, I see your hand.
Yeah. Thank you for the presentation, David. I think you're absolutely right. We've had many good conversations about this project. I feel like the planning has been where we've had the most robust conversations. And I think all of the revisions you've made have really improved the project, starting with the main lobby being on West 2nd. Rather than on West 1st. I totally agree with you. Those are very different characters. And I do think putting the main residence on West 2nd is a big improvement. I do think that, over time, West 2nd is in a very transitional time of its, of what's happening. I think there's a lot more exciting things to come. And so I do think you're placing the flexible program on the right side of the plan. So I think all of those gestures are good. And we've wrestled about, transformers and bike locations. So I feel very confident with the planning direction. I do think that the open space is also in a really nice location at West 2nd and E. I'm a little bit worried though about not the strategy, because I think the strategy is much better with these planters than the actual, lawn that you had previously showed, but if you go to that site plan, I still think there might be a little bit too much density of plantings. And it's something that I think could just be further refined and considered as you continue, especially with the image with the tree canopy. I think we're seeing a lot of planters and very little plaza space. And I just wonder if it's the right balance. And maybe one thing I'll just call attention to is that dashed line, which is really like an arcade. You know, that building edge really comes close to these planning zones. And I just wonder if dimensionally there's enough space there. And I can see that you're trying to navigate, you know, changing planes. So these are good strategies. I think it's just, you know, further refinement as this gets developed. I'd like you to consider thinking about creating more physical space for people to be. I think the conversations we've had fewer time to discuss is really the architecture. And I do think it has improved. I do think that, you know, there are things that I would have liked to have talked in this subcommittee about, you know, should there really be a cornice, or is it really just a simple coping edge? Is the color the right strategy? But I do think it has really improved from where we started, and can imagine those conversations successfully happening with the BPDA staff. So I think, thank you for listening to some of our comments. I think it's in a better place than where it started.
Thank you, Mimi. David, I saw you maybe wanting to have a response to Mimi. Did you want to respond to anything that Mimi said? Okay.
I'm good.
All right, Shauna.
Thanks very much for the presentation, David. And actually, Mimi, I had not noticed that arcade. I was already actually going to comment about the density of the landscape in the corner, but I do second that a little bit of claustrophobic feeling with how close the arcade is. I too, some of the things I wanted to comment on, first of all, thank you very much for the responsiveness and for working with us throughout the process. I do appreciate the generosity of the sidewalk width along West 2nd, both for the existing trees, but also to offer a very sort of generous front porch to your building. And agree, very significant change in changing the programming around the space, around this open space on the corner, and the significant change from lawn, which really didn't seem at the right scale, although was a very open public gesture to the community. I think, and while I think the idea of planting and hardscape is the right direction, I think it is feeling a little bit more, it's feeling more closed off than it probably should. Still in the right direction, but I think that level of refinement can be worked further with BPDA staff, as well as the other thing we didn't get to look at from a landscape perspective very much was the detailing and the materiality of the landscape, but I'm confident you can work with staff on that. The one other element I'd like to add, and I again applaud the move to shift the community space, the large community space, to West First, and like many projects, it's not unusual to not understand what the character of that community space will be in the short term. However, given that it's such a large portion of your facade, that's not necessarily currently a widely traversed pedestrian street, but it is a pedestrian street. I'm wondering if you can work with BPDA staff on considering ways of temporary activation that don't have a significant budget to it, but somehow announcing the address of that being an active space that will become an even more active space. So working with staff on that as well. And thank you again for being responsive to our comments.
Thanks, Shauna. David, Haseen, or Kirk, we want to give you a opportunity to chime in before opening the floor, since you were both at the last subcommittee.
Kirk, why don't you go ahead first?
Sure. I think the comments that have been made by my fellow commissioners are spot on. I appreciate what you've done at back of sidewalk in terms of additional activation and the moving of the bike room. I agree on the corner treatment and importance. And I think, you know, it's a wonderful refuge. Hopefully you can keep the transparency significant for the cafe so that the community really feels welcome in to that space, and also maybe even make the space more transparent, whether walls that roll up or whatever you can do to make it feel like it's part of that wonderful little open space you've made. You know, I think there's continued work to do on the maturation of the facades, which BPDA staff can certainly manage with your able help. So I think that's the extent of my comments, David.
Kirk, I actually don't think I have anything to add to the good comments that Mimi, Kirk, and Shauna raised, except to just reinforce the idea that I like the idea of the 3 zones of seating that exist in front of the lobby, but I feel like the little tails of landscape that are reaching out to grab them may just be very cumbersome and contribute to that sense of obstacles, where as I believe that same treatment could be accomplished with paving, you know, with clever paving solutions, and still honor the diagram that you have in front of us, and also just appreciating the addition of brick, more brick into the facade. I think this is a neighborhood where there's a lot of panel, and I think that more of those robust materials only help.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Kirk. And McYoung, I see your hand up, and then we'll move to some public comment.
Great. I think this is a real improvement. I did see this, I think, in the previous subcommittee meeting. I just had a question. Is this on West 2nd Street? You have the planter sort of makes this, I don't know, like a dog bone shape. I'm sorry, it's not a good analogy.
It's
And
like a
there's-
gaming console. That's what I see when I look at
That's exactly. And the space that's like facing West 2nd Street, are those tables and chairs? David, I think you're on mute.
Some of the comments we had was, you know, that the undifferentiated lawn, that we didn't feel like we had gathering spaces. And so we thought about, are there ways to articulate obviously I don't know whether people are picking up, but the change in grade between the sidewalk and the cafe is actually a couple of feet. And it doesn't require ramps, but it is slopes. So,
Right.
you know, we're
but
challenged because of our
the
resiliency issues
Sorry,
here.
David. So the square
That,
tables.
Sorry, he's having internet issues, so he might not be fully hearing.
I think I'm talking about a different area than David is.
So I
You know that
can, I
little-
can
yeah,
answer
sorry
that.
about
Those
that.
are actually, those are
Okay.
seating, that is seating
are
for the
seating.
community. And it's right now being shown as like chess tables, something that
Mhm.
people can come and gather together around.
Mhm. So I think I like the idea of these rooms that you're creating. Right now, they're all very similar in size, and I think this is definitely as a diagram going in the right direction. But as you move forward, I would encourage you to think about maybe one of them having a different kind of use and character. They all kind of seem to have the same squarish size, and I wonder if one of them for the residents could become more like a garden space with more seating nooks, like more 2Zs or 3Z seating areas, rather than a more open plaza area. And I do question that nook that you're pulling in from West 2nd Street, rather to keep a consistent language all along the sidewalk of West Second Street that's planted and has trees, and then to make that central plaza that faces the community cafe a little bit larger, so you start to create a hierarchy. So that central space is a bigger plaza, and then maybe to the left of that are more garden seating nooks, and then to the right of that is something else. But I do appreciate your kind of really doing a wholesale change to the landscape, and think that this is a good direction that you're going in.
Thank you.
Thanks, McKeon. Laura, I see your hand has popped up, as well as David, and then we'll move to public comment.
Okay. I think the comments about the landscape at the corner here are solid, but I wanted to maybe throw a few other thoughts out there. One is, you know, landscape rooms, which you've made, are really nice, but they don't always need walls at every side to feel like rooms. The landscape, I think, is a little bit different. But I do have a clarifying question. Where the pink dotted lines are, is there a difference in slope from the sidewalk up to the finished grade? Tell me what that is. Is that where it's a couple feet?
It's a similar, you know, grade change.
I see this.
It's sloped.
Yeah, I see the steps. I see the steps on the right off of the
I don't know
community
if you
cafe.
can hear me.
Yeah, so we're going from about 16
It's a
and a
similar
half.
slope.
Yeah, it's anywhere from a foot to a foot and a half eased slope. So they're sloped walkways. We're getting up to 18 feet at our lobby and cafe.
Yep. So you're kind of using the walls that way to kind of hold that grade. But I would still try to figure out whether or not you really needed all those arms that make up those rooms, and maybe there's something a little more simple. I myself like the inside outside of the community versus the interior. I just think it's too small. It feels a little bit like you wouldn't sit there. So I would look at that. And then huge beds like this are a little hard to maintain. So I think you've got some opportunities to think about how big those rooms are going to be. And again, by having to line both of the pathways in, that what you're doing is kind of privatizing this, right? Because it feels like a chute going into those spaces. And maybe you ought to try something where there's one central entrance, right? And then you start to play with the rooms, you know, on the right and left. But you're headed in the right direction. You absolutely are. I think this is so much more useful and rich than the lawn is. I just have a personal issue with lawns in cities that end up becoming dog parks. So thanks. I think it's really great. Everyone else has made terrific comments, and I support those. So thanks for being responsive.
Thanks, Laura. David?
I just wanted to say that I think David Haseen made a very important point, that this building has gotten simpler and it has gotten more consistent about its brick. And in a neighborhood where, as David said it, there is a proliferation of panels of colors, textures, sizes. I'm relieved by this building that it has a sense of substance, just it's big. It's a full block. And it has a consistency around that block that I applaud. So thank you.
Linda, could I just chime in here and just say one thing? And it's honestly obvious, I think, but I just want it to be said. We spent so much time looking at West 2nd Street and even, you know, looking a little bit at East Street. I feel where we didn't spend a lot of time is looking at First Street. And like I said, it's a really transitional moment in that development of that corridor. And this is probably more a request to the BPDA staff that's following this to please pay attention to that elevation, because I really feel like we didn't get to look at it too carefully or what's happening on that sidewalk. That was not really the focus of our conversations, and I do think it's just as important.
Thanks, Mimi, and thanks, David. All right, Christina, I see we have one member of the public with a hand up, and there may be others as well.
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function, and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Mr. Philip Balboni, are you able to unmute yourself? Lizzie, it looks like we haven't. Oh, here we go. Philip, are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah. Good evening.
Excellent.
Thank you. Sorry for that delay. I'm Phil Balboni, the owner of the adjacent site at 270 West 2nd Street. And I'm here tonight to offer my enthusiastic support for Jones Street in their redevelopment of 295 West 1st. Evolution of the 295 West 1st Street project from inception, including the recent design changes. They have our enthusiastic support. We bought our property in 1953, and over the years, it's been home to our family trucking business, to other trucking companies, and finally, for the past 40 years, to seafood processing facilities. It's still an active facility for North Coast Seafoods, our tenant. Our vision, and Jones Street's, is to make West 1st a premier new residential corridor in harmony with the existing neighborhood and providing new homes for workers in the area. It's very exciting to me personally to see this vision come to life, and we look forward to building our own project and to ensuring the highest level of coordination with 295 West 1st. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. Commissioners, at this time, I see no additional raised hands, so we will close the public testimony period.
Thanks, Philip. Thanks, Christina. And thank you also to Laura for jumping in there when we couldn't hear David. I appreciate that.
I'm really sorry.
No worries.
I've never had this happen to me before.
You were there for the important presentation part, David, so thank you for that. All right, commissioners, do we have a motion?
Yeah, I will propose a motion to approve with a further development on the open space at the corner of West 2nd and East Street, and continued development of the architectural language as it gets further refined with the BPDA staff.
And I'll second that motion. Oh, McYoung was going to say.
David, you beat me to it.
It's all good. Everyone gets a chance to chime in now. All in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans.
Aye.
Shauna Gillies Smith.
Aye.
David Haseen.
Aye.
McYoung.
Aye.
Kathy Cataritas.
Aye.
Mimi Love.
Aye.
David Manfredi.
Aye.
Bill Ron. Bill, I think you're just on mute.
Aye.
Thank you. Lara Solano.
Aye.
Kirk Sykes.
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley. Aye. You are approved. Congratulations.
Very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. All right, we're going to say goodbye to Commissioners Love and Manfredi and Commissioner Kim. We'll say goodnight actually for the evening because you're recused from the next two projects. And we'll transition to those projects now. So commissioners, even though these two new projects tonight are both Northeastern projects, we are going to take them one at a time. So we'll see the Northeastern Institutional Master Plan presentation first and provide our comments for that. And then we will shift and see the athletic facility presentation with comments following that. And I think that with Amy's absence, that we'll be getting a planning review by Ted.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
One moment, sir.
While Lizzie's bringing that up, I'd like to introduce myself, Ted Schwartzberg, Assistant Deputy Director for Zoning Compliance, and I'll be presenting on behalf of Amy Chambers, the Director of Planning and Zoning. Thank you for having me, Commissioners. Next slide, please. Thank you, Lizzie. So just to quickly recap the highlights that Christina reviewed earlier, the entitlements sought tonight is a renewal of the institutional master plan. There are 17 development sites. 11 of these sites were included in the 2013 IMP. 6 sites are redevelopments of existing buildings, and 2 sites are existing surface parking lots. Next slide, please. The primary planning document guiding staff review of this IMP is the Avenue of the Arts Design Guidelines, which was produced by the BPDA with the firm Sasaki, and it was adopted by the BPDA board in 2015. And the timeline that it was anticipated to be used was in the coming decade or two to guide subsequent IMP renewals. So as such, upon its adoption in 2015, it was intended very much to influence the conversation that we're having tonight. And it was very much directed on the sites that Northeastern will be presenting tonight. Overall, the document's key principles were to provide a massing and public realm framework for Huntington Avenue. And I pulled one illustration from the plan on the right side to show how important shadow and wind impact were to this planning study. And the main planning principle for improving the public realm along Huntington Avenue. Next slide, please. This general principle of setting taller buildings back from Huntington Avenue is relevant to 2 of the sites that Northeastern will present tonight and were studied extensively in the plan. And the plan was not turned into zoning. So these are general principles that staff are using in their review. On the right side is the principles in text form, and at the left side is the text form of the principles that I'll read through. The right side is an illustration from the PNF. For the Cabot site that you'll see tonight, the plan recommended a maximum street wall of 90 feet, and then at 90 feet, a 15-foot step back, and that heights in general on the Cabot site should step down to Huntington Avenue. The plan recommended a western-facing welcome mat open space along Huntington Avenue and 27 to 30-foot setbacks and a minimum 50-foot gap between buildings to enable pedestrian passage. And I'll present a second and final site on the next slide where the plan also had specific application of that general guidance that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So at the intersection of Huntington Avenue and Parker Street, again, the plan recommended a 90-foot street wall with that 15-foot step back. And in particular, the plan recommended that the massing along Parker Street be designed to mitigate wind impact. The plan recommended that the front access of the building is along Huntington with the service side along Parker. And again, 27 to 30-foot setbacks for the sidewalk. And with that, I conclude the background information from the Avenue of the Arts Design Guidelines, and I hope this information is helpful to the commissioners as they consider.
Thank you, Ted. Appreciate that background. I think we're ready for the Northeastern and Sasaki team to pull up their presentation.
All right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great. Hello, my name is Corey Berg, and I'm the Director of Campus Planning at Northeastern University. I am joined by my colleagues Victoria Avelina, Associate Vice President of Campus Planning and Design, and John Tobin, Vice President of City and Community Engagement. I'm also joined by representatives from our design teams that are working on both our IMP and 262 St. Botolph, which we'll get to after this presentation. I'll start off by thanking the commissioners and echoing Linda, your thanks, since I know that you all are doing double duty this month with this meeting, so thank you. I also wanted to thank the BPDA staff for your support and guidance on both efforts thus far. Northeastern filed its joint IMP and FPNF on June 14th, 2024. Our first task force meeting was held on June 17th, and this is, of course, our first time in front of BCDC for both efforts. Our IMP follows a 2-year renewal of our 2013 IMP, which was approved in October of 2023. And we had begun work on this 10-year renewal at that time, but delayed filing to account for the approval of our third amendment to the 2013 IMP. I'm now going to hand it off to Marianne Ocampo, who will be presenting on behalf of our IMP team. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Corey. Good evening, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. For the Northeastern IMP, we've been creating a holistic plan that's looking at buildings and landscapes and mobility and infrastructure to really think about the transformation of the campus for Boston for the next 10 years. Next slide, please. This IMP is really guided by 5 campus planning principles. The first being flexibility and agility, thinking about space and planning for that space as it relates to the unique kind of institutional makeup of having a multi-campus global system where students are moving across the global system at Northeastern, as well as a major significant co-op program that's part of Northeastern. So for us, it's understanding how we can think about space in a flexible way, a dynamic way, and one that is shared. Second is impactful learning and collaboration, and promoting collaboration, multidisciplinary research, experiential learning, and investing in academic and research buildings through renovations and through new development that supports the interdisciplinary growth aspirations of the university. Third, inclusion and belonging is about designing inclusive environments, but specifically focused on ways that the built environment can improve accessibility and the way that people move, rest, and feel that welcoming sense of being on the campus. Fourth, sustainability and resilience is expanding really Northeastern's role in sustainability and resilience, and really implementing just solutions that address climate change. And in this particular case, it's looking at heat island effect, stormwater management, along with a host of other kind of systems thinking solutions. And then last, connection and community is about physical investments in the social infrastructure that really foster impactful engagement experiences and contribute to the neighbors' efforts to stay, thrive, and prosper. And this is really focused on connectivity, the public realm, and the way that the Climate Justice and Sustainability Hub at Northeastern is working on environmental justice. So all of these planning principles that are guiding the IMP translate into what we see as 3 big ideas that form an urban design framework for future development. The urban design framework translates into physical strategies and ways that we think of physical projects. The first is about immersive and inclusive learning. Second, sustainable and resilient public realm. And then third, a campus within the city. So for immersive inclusive learning, it's really about the focus on how we distribute the different uses of the campus, and noticeably where we are focusing our efforts for academic and research growth, as you see with the kind of cyan and blue colors here, but really concentrating clusters of growth on the east end of campus, acknowledging that ISEC EXP on the South Campus came out of the 2013 IMP, and then really starting to think about Forsyth Street as a major spine that carries a new academic core for academic and research growth within that area. We're also looking at campus life uses, dining, recreation, as you see in the magenta, and where those concentrations are, as well as where housing is located within the kind of periphery of the campus. A second big idea is sustainable and resilient public realm. And it's about connecting or creating interconnected kind of series of public open spaces that are part of an environmental and social infrastructure. This connectivity, as you see in the yellow, shows those pedestrian connections that cut across the campus, understanding where those crossings are, be it along a major corridor, or understanding that with transit, but also creating a series of open spaces throughout the campus that promote green infrastructure, think about reinforcement of the urban forest plan by the city, and then reach a level 3 arboretum status for the campus in the future. The third big idea is focused on a campus within the city. And Northeastern wants to contribute to the way that Boston city making is happening. And so by doing this, it's designing development with public realm improvements really along these urban corridors. So first with Huntington Avenue as the Avenue of the Arts, linking eds and meds, understanding the arts as part of that, and all of these different institutions, celebrating the public realm with welcome mats, pedestrian improvements, and art. Second, in this case, is looking, for example, at enhancing Forsyth Street, connecting between Ruggles Station to Huntington Avenue to the Fens. And we'll take a look at that in a couple more slides. So our proposed plan on the next slide is showing an urban design framework that includes landscape and mobility systems thinking, along with a development strategy. In this case, what you'll see is all of the white show the proposed buildings. We have 8 redevelopment sites that are being shown. 7 of these were approved in the 2013 IMP. The massing shows the zoning envelope. But what you'll also see is 10 sites really for renovation, recognizing that there's a lot of older kind of building fabric here that have deferred maintenance challenges. So how can we renovate those buildings? And then in the dashed lines, what you'll see are 3 areas of interest really with the north lot, the Ryder lot, and Cargill Stearns, which you can see somewhere on that drawing. But ultimately thinking about this holistically. So on the next slide, as we move forward, we're looking at proposed uses. And in this case, the proposed uses for the 8 redevelopment sites are really concentrating academic and research uses within the academic core, which is situated really south of Huntington Avenue, along Forsyth Street, to the east end with Mugar and Cullinane, where they are today, but recognizing that we have academic anchors really to the west and to the east, across from the MFA and along that you're seeing to the east. What you'll also note is that we are showing 840 Columbus here to the south, and then Whitehall redevelopment, in this case, the only residential structure that we're showing for the IMPNF, as well as the multi-purpose event space or arena that we're seeing on to the east. So on the next slide, I would say that part of this has been looking at 7 campus communities, which are essentially our campus districts. We want to note that each one has a different character based on their architectures, their landscape, and their uses, and that the intent is to promote a plural architecture at the university, and to think about the landscape as part of a connective tissue that unifies really the identity of Northeastern. So as we zoom in to each one of these campus communities, or at least a sampling of them, we'll first start with University Square. This is the original campus with the white glazed brick buildings and Crimson Quad as the kind of formal kind of gateway and visibility of Northeastern from Huntington Avenue. So for this IMP, we are proposing, in this case, renovations mostly with Hayden Hall, L Hall, and Dodge Hall, as well as Robinson, and a rethinking of Crimson Quad in a more accessible kind of manner that promotes easy entry into those buildings that line it, but also rethinking Crimson Quad. On the next slide, this is probably the most transformative of development districts that we have as a campus community. And this is really looking at Forsyth Park in a way that we're reimagining this area that currently has Cabot as a recreational and athletics kind of massing along Huntington, as well as UR Complex and Forsyth buildings. Those were predominantly office spaces as well as some instructional spaces, but rethinking these as redevelopment sites with Cabot really created with 2 volumes with academic and research spaces there, activating the ground plane with makerspace, lobby, lounge, exhibition space, and cafe. Forsyth and UR Complex being rethought for academic and research space as well. To note, in this particular district, we are also providing a way that we're rethinking Forsyth Street and a better experience between Ruggles Station towards the Finns, thinking about what that would be like to be on the ground. And if you're rolling or walking, that experience of how we could start to think about landscape, active edges, and massing. What you'll also know with the Cabot kind of redevelopment is that we want to look at the park that's really at the intersection of Forsyth Street and Huntington Avenue as one of those welcome mats that we saw within the Avenue of the Arts, and understand how the podiums and the tower can respect the way that we should be forming the kind of massing as it touches the ground and we think about the public realm. You'll also note that there's a diagonal that actually moves people from that welcome mat through to what we're seeing as Churchill Hall, a renovated Hayden Hall, and where the Curry Student Center and Snell Library is, so that we can protect the public realm and really start to think about service in between some of the existing buildings and the redeveloped Cabot.
Marianne, just a quick time check that you've hit 10 minutes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I will just say that we have University Finns. We're looking at north of Huntington with a new Whitehall for residential kind of beds for undergraduate students and ways that we're thinking about improved streetscape improvements. And then on the last slide, I'll end with the East End and rethinking this particular area in such a way that Mugart and Cullinane are sites that are redeveloped for a major research facility. Gainsborough is rethought for academic and recreational use. And then where Matthew is currently located, a proposed multi-purpose arena. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. Appreciate the presentation. And
Linda, I think we have just 2 quick
for urban
design comments. Yeah, and I'll just keep it so fast. Because Marianne's presentation was so thorough and thoughtful, just wanted to say that if it were even possible, we wanted to zoom out a tiny bit more and acknowledge that simultaneous to reviewing the Northeastern IMP, the commission and BPDA staff are also reviewing the Wentworth IMP, and also individual development projects at 500 Huntington, 409 Huntington, and recently approved projects like the Huntington Theater. So it feels like between 2 IMPs and 3 major development projects, the whole of Huntington Ave and some significant geography between Huntington Ave and Tremont Street or Columbus Ave is sort of under review. So we wanted to be thinking about that very large diagram at the same time and what opportunities there are to make some big connections that I think Marianne made references to, as well as understanding the kind of neighborhoods. I think there were 7 neighborhoods that the presentation acknowledged within the campus, breaking down some of the scale of this diagram. Next slide. And to say that, as we're thinking about those smaller clusters that Marianne was talking about, the relationship to, adjacent, under review, or proposed development at 500 Huntington, Whitehall's relationship to 409 Huntington, and potential impact to the Emerald Necklace there just north of it. And the kind of significant public realm opportunity we see at the multipurpose athletic facility. That was the last slide Marianne was talking about there, and its connection to the Mass Ave T station via Gainsborough Street. So I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. We had asked Christina to give us a diagram of all the things we are reviewing right now, so appreciate seeing those all on the map. All right, so typically what we do when we see a large project like this, Corey and Marianne, is we'll give some comments. Commissioners will give some comments about things they'd like to see in anticipation of this moving to subcommittee. So the good thing is you don't have to answer any of these questions today. And we'll try to summarize at the end of our meeting to make it a little bit easier. And then we'll move on to the athletic facility as well. So we have a couple of hands up. David Haseen.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you very much for there's a lot of information, Marianne, that you packed into that short presentation, and it looks very, very thoughtful, and the goals that you established all make a tremendous amount of sense. I have a lot of confidence in the planning of the campus. I think that what I'd like to, on a personal level, be focusing on is the place where the campus interfaces with the city most directly, particularly along Huntington Avenue and Tremont Street, for example. Definitely understanding those connections across the Gulf of the Southwest Corridor a little bit better. If there are new or additional connections that are being planned, I'd definitely like to understand that and how it links to the campus network. But where one place I would really like to focus on, or a place where I have some concern, let's say, is that there is a lot of development that's happening along Huntington Avenue. I definitely think that it's important that we look at the proposed residential building across from the, oh no, or is it an academic building, across from the MFA in conjunction with the project that Wentworth has proposed next door. I'm not exactly advocating for a City Beautiful response of the kind that built the MFA, but I think that the MFA is not just a city treasure, it's an international institution of great importance with a very, very strong formal architecture. And I really want to understand what the other side of the street is going to look like relative to that very, very important building. It's sort of like the State House or, the Capitol. It's a really significant piece of architecture, and I'm concerned that the other side of the street is not only going to be very tall, but very choppy. And so I'd like to really, have some views. I think pedestrian views from those streets looking in both directions and so forth, or wherever the campus interfaces with the city most directly, would be very helpful. And the other part of that is Whitehall, which does look like a, if I look at the development of Huntington as it stands now, I'm getting used to the idea that as I leave town on Huntington Avenue, that the left side is going to be the traditional Northeastern campus side of Huntington is going to be quite dense, quite tall, and quite consistent. Similarly, the other side of the street, which does have the adjacencies to the MFA, has more older buildings, a very different scale, and Whitehall looks like it is an exception on that side of the street. And I would like to really drill into that a little bit, notwithstanding the comments that were made about its impact on the Emerald Necklace. I think the idea that the two sides of Huntington Avenue might feel different or have very distinct characters might be a positive thing. And so I want to really, Huntington is such an important street. I really think that as a Civic Design Commission, we should be spending some serious time understanding what the character of that street is up and down both sides and how it faces the MFA. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Marianne, can you pull up either a site plan or maybe one of the kind of axons of the district, just so commissioners can see that as they're making comments? Thank you very much. Kirk.
Yeah, no, thank you. A very thoughtful presentation. I guess when you come to subcommittee, I'd love to focus on the edges, and a lot of what you're doing is on the edges. But over time, you've done a wonderful job of improving so many of your streetscapes. Ruggles, radically different with the buildings you've added, and more relief. Tremont, Columbus, and Huntington. So I guess I'm imagining that might take the character of some contextual photographs. How does it feel on the street? And what are those edge conditions today, and how have they evolved, and how is what you're doing now going to reinforce some of how your campus interfaces the other sides of the streets that are not part of the campus? So in addition to the great ideas David had, those are some areas of focus that I think would be interesting to me from a more granular or a field perspective, if you could. Thank you.
Thanks, Kirk. Other comments, commissioners? Shauna, you're on mute.
Thank you for a very thorough and information-packed presentation. So I am looking forward to seeing the full presentation, including the comments that my previous commissioners have mentioned. One thing with respect to the edges, and I know Northeastern, like a number of other campuses, many of the historical buildings or the older buildings are at an elevated level. And you had mentioned a more inclusive approach to the renovation of the existing buildings from an accessibility perspective. But so I'd like to understand that in kind of a macro big level, but also how that impacts the edges that are just being discussed, and in particular Presman Quad for one. But overall, that, and I'm sure that is something that you will address, but it's a particular interest of mine with respect to renovations and campus planning.
Thank you, Shauna.
Thanks.
Laura.
Because this is such an urban campus, I would love to see how all of the open spaces, which are admirable, how those work with the existing open spaces, and also sort of what Northeastern's position is on the public using those spaces. So some plan diagrams of existing open space and the relationship of the proposed open space. I'd also like to understand, if it's available, sort of the phasing of this, how it might be built over time. I don't know if that's possible. If it is, that would be terrific to see. But thank you for the really thorough presentation. So look forward to speaking about this again.
Thanks, Laura. Other commissioner comments? Kathy.
Hey there. It's sort of by extension on the landscapes that are public. I'm actually curious, given all of the density or new density and new heights and new building, of course, I'm curious what you see as being the emblematic spaces that will continue either to convey Northeastern University, or ones that you might be thinking about either as individual gathering places in the open space, but when one turns a corner onto Huntington Avenue or approaches the campus, are you seeing as the are you seeing as the point at which you know you have arrived at Northeastern? Some of that I know just happens over time and development, but I'd be, it's partly a question of transition and partly a question of how you're planning for the campus's image.
Great question. That's a great question. I think something that we think about often. I think we all think about Princeton Quad as a kind of very traditional quad and a landmark. But I think we think of all of our open spaces as pretty iconic and are, I think, trying to, through our arboretum, reinforce that is part of the brand, is that kind of open space. So look forward to digging into that more.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Corey. I don't see any other hands right now. I can add a few of my comments. And most of my comments are from being on the campus. Thank you for such a great presentation, as others have said. So one thing that I would love to see in subcommittee is this idea of internal circulation. So when you're on the campus today, you have such an interesting experience because you have this idea of the shifted grid as you come off of Huntington. You have the idea of actually passing over the rail near Ruggles and being in a different neighborhood context there. And then you have kind of all these other projects that we've been looking at around it. When you get onto the campus, though, and you come off of Huntington Avenue at that Krensman Quad, that's the point at which I think the visitor becomes really confused on campus. And so what I'd love to see in subcommittee is a discussion about how you, with the new development sites, new landscape, work to actually reorient the visitor, faculty, your staff, your students, and so that the campus is more legible. And as part of that, and Marianne showed, some of those diagrams where you had the pedestrian tissue or the idea of the pedestrian tissue in aqua and rose colors and other things like that. But I think really getting into how you move through this campus is really important. Like the experience from Krensman Quad is that you come off Huntington, you pass through the quad, and then you wiggle around the Curry Center and you kind of have service drives that peel off from a lot of what you would normally have on a campus as a main walkway. And so just helping to demystify that as you're beginning these plans would be really helpful. And then the other comment, I love this idea of the edges that some of the commissioners have brought up. But I wonder if there's also an identity within these districts, Marianne, that you talked about actually passing into a new part of the campus. And I'm really intrigued with this idea of the welcome mats. And Corey, even your comment just now about, well, where are these interfaces? How do you know that you're moving to a different part of the campus or a different district? So I'd like to understand what the visual cues would be for that. And then last is just to understand the scale of the open space. So because this is a campus that has grown so organically, you didn't necessarily have this organizing device of these larger squares. And so what you have are these fragments of open space. And even in some of these new development sites, you see these very compact open spaces. And I'm very curious to understand how those will feel in shadow, how they'll feel more connected to the other parts of the campus, given the challenge that we just described a couple of minutes ago, and really, how all of these spaces will come together. Jonathan, I see your hand go up and down. Do you?
Yeah, it's up. Yeah, and I agree with everything said, and I really want to be repetitive. But I think the one thing that I want to just commend you on is that I appreciate the framing of this presentation around some of these sort of big ideas. And I think as we talk about this in subcommittee, I just want to make sure that you can lean into that as a kind of narrative framework to actually present, as we divide this up by subtopic, whatever, as we kind of get into it more granularly. I think that that lens should extend beyond just the introductory diagram and see to what extent that can be used as a way to frame the conversation as we think about some of the issues around, kids on Huntington Avenue or all these other things as well. So I just want to keep that through line strong through the development of this process.
Linda, can I add one request, which
Yeah.
is that in the old days, this is something that we would have looked at in model format, live around a table. And when I requested views up and down Huntington Avenue, for example, or views from the Fenway, that's going to be, we'll get a couple of views, and that will be helpful. But to the extent that at least it's subcommittee, there would be an ability to kind of move around the model or sort of experience it like a model would, I think, make the discussion a lot easier, a lot more helpful. And so this is one where I'm literally dying to, stand up and walk around a model and put my head down and look down this view and look down that view. And we can't really do that. So to the extent that you can help us do that, I would ask for that. Because it is, you're making a big part of the city, and in a looks like it's going to be in a wonderful way, but I think that that's something that could be a helpful process for at least some of the topics that we might talk about in subcommittee.
Well, David,
we would love to host you.
Yeah.
We have a gorgeous model at 216 Mass Ave.
Oh, really? Oh.
Point Sasaki developed just the right scale model. So we'll think through how we can communicate that virtually, or if there is an in-person subcommittee, we're happy to bring the model along.
Well, that would be exciting to me, but you have to canvass the rest of the group. But even if it's available to be seen over some period of time, so that we can stop by and look at it, that at the minimum, I'd love to be able to take advantage of that good work.
And I do want to chime in here and just note, right, that Victoria, I know we've seen snippets of the model, and it's a really great asset in terms of reviewing all these pieces. Perhaps there's opportunities for us to think about it being hosted here at the BPDA for a period of time where the commissioners can come and view it at their discretion.
That's great. We'd be happy to do that.
We have done that in this kind of during and post-COVID era where we've gone to the BPDA and taken a look at those, and that is really helpful. Thank you. I also wrote down the address, though, if it has to stay there on Mass Ave, we've got that too. Any other commissioner comments? All right. Maybe we'll move to public comment and then come back together and think about next steps and how we might break up some of these conversations at future subcommittees. Christina, do we have any public comment?
At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioners, at this time, I see no hands raised.
Thanks, Christina. Hopefully the public will join us in our future meetings as well. All right, commissioners and proponent, I think for next steps, I wrote down about 12 of the kind of broad questions and requests from the commissioners. And Corey, I saw you taking a lot of good notes, so leave it up to you and Marianne whether you'd like us to summarize those or whether you've got what you need.
I did take notes, but I will, we'll work with Christina on making sure we've captured everything.
Great. And then in terms of just reviewing these, we often look at these in terms of systems or urban design systems. And we often start at this larger scale where we're beginning to look at the edges and the context and then weaving in the open space framework that gets into how you know that you've gone onto the campus, how you experience the campus as a pedestrian or as a driver, someone coming off of the T. And so understanding those systems, and then having a session or two about the architecture itself and some of the massing forms. So that's often how we review these. And Christina, I'm wondering if it makes sense for you as you're working with the proponent to maybe come up with a schedule or what makes sense for talking about each of those pieces as they come back.
I was taking notes as you were just talking, and I think we can report back either in a chair check-in or the July 9th meeting with a proposed schedule.
So that's a proposal. I'm curious what other commissioners feel about that and whether there's a motion to send it to subcommittee.
Well, I'll certainly make a motion to send it to subcommittee. I think that it'll be so important, obviously, Christina, to make sure that the right people are at the right meetings there, you know, that the you know, experts in campus planning and landscape are part of that discussion, and that the, you know, architects are looking at the overall massing and edges and context. So hopefully this is the kind of planning exercise that isn't doesn't have to come to the board next week, and we can like somehow figure out some sort of a system so that we get the right voices at the right time. But definitely a motion to move to subcommittee.
Thanks, David. I don't know, Kirk, if you're going to offer a second or if you have another comment.
I will do both. So I thought of one additional thing I might ask for, which would be the public interface on the edges, and in particular, what invites the public in, what is not intended for the public, and sort of what is the experience like for those who may not be a student as the public realm ends and the university begins. So it might be a further refinement of my definition of edge, but in particular, what's that invitation to your surrounding communities? I will offer a second with that comment if my fellow commissioners have no further comment, that we send it to subcommittee.
All right, thanks, David. Thanks, Kirk. All in favor of sending it to subcommittee, please say aye. Jonathan Evans?
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith? Shauna, you might be on mute.
Aye.
Thank you. David Haseen?
Aye.
Kathy Kataridis?
Aye.
Bill Ron? Bill, I think you're on mute.
Aye.
Thank you. Laura Solano?
I'm not doing.
Aye.
Kirk Sykes?
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley. Aye. We look forward to seeing you all in subcommittee.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
You.
And Corey, will you be staying on for the second project? All right.
I will.
Great. We'll turn it over to BPDA staff. I don't know, Ted, if you also are going to give us some planning framework.
Yes, I will. Thank you. I'll be presenting a few slides on behalf of Amy Chambers again. So thank you. Next slide, please. Just a quick recap of the entitlement sought. This is a large project ADB permit for Matthews Arena that we will discuss here. And I'll go quickly through the next slide, please, since this context was already discussed by the proponents in their last presentation. So unlike the Avenue of the Arts design guidelines, which really focused on wind, shadow, impacts on Huntington Avenue itself and the neighbors along Huntington Avenue, this site is further removed to the south, so that plan is not relevant. And what the planning and transportation staff focused on for the review of Matthews Arena was the unique neighborhood features for Boston that Uniquely in the Fenway, Back Bay, and South End, we actually have service streets. We have a network of primary streets, and then we also have alleys serving the service side of the building, which is an unusual condition in a lot of parts of the city. Next slide, please. And this will be my final slide. And I just want to call attention to the work that the staff did on access for loading and vehicular access. The initial version of this plan was the one on the bottom left that had loading and vehicular access off of Gainsborough Street, which we thought was a little bit of a problem because not only is there the opportunity to use a service alley that's adjacent, as was mentioned in the last discussion, Gainsborough Street is an important north-south connection between the Fenway and South End neighborhoods for pedestrians, and also it serves as a pedestrian access from Northeastern's campus and the Fenway into the Orange Line station at Mass Ave. So we were very pleased to work with the team to advance the design to version number 3, which is on the top right, which now is using our service alley, which is on the backside of Mass Ave, as a service side of this arena, which is a reuse of a very historic arena. So that hopefully is the most helpful planning context for the commissioners to be aware of. And thank you for allowing me to present this evening.
Thank you, Ted. Appreciate that. I think we're ready for the Northeastern team.
All right, me again. Thank you all again. And I especially want to thank the BPDA staff who have been really helpful in guiding us on the design thus far. As Ted laid out, this is a project, it will be our first in the IMP. It was actually contemplated in our 2013 IMP in the form of an addition. We are now here a decade later, looking at a reimagined version of this site. So with that, I will hand it off to Stephen Sefton, who I think may need to be upgraded still.
And Linda, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I need to recuse myself on this one, please.
All right, thanks, Kirk.
Thank you.
Is Stephen able to unmute himself yet? Perfect, great, I see him here.
All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to present this project to the group. Why don't we just move to the next slide, Corey, and I can give a little bit of a background on the existing facility. I imagine many people are familiar with the building, but Matthews Arena is over 100 years old. It's gone through many changes over the years. It is currently at the end of its useful life related to supporting the program needs that the university has. Structurally, it's failing. And over time, the building's been significantly altered. We have done a historic study report on the building. And really, when you look at what's remaining of the building, there's very little historic character left that hasn't been altered over time. So with that, we can kind of move into the next slide, which is an aerial view looking to the east. So you're kind of hovering over here at Huntington Avenue, looking back. So this is an existing building in orange. And just a couple key points with the existing area. The gray area that surrounds most of Matthews Arena is parking. The main entry is adjacent to that alley that we are going to propose putting the new service access. The current loading happens off of Gainsborough Street. And as you can imagine, that has some significant conflicts with the pedestrian movement that's proposed in the institutional master plan. And we have a couple ideas about how to improve these conditions with the new facility and how to strengthen those pedestrian relationships at the site. Next. When we started the project, of course, we looked at a lot of the existing context, both adjacent to the immediate Matthews Arena, but also some of the more recent buildings that have been built on the campus. There is a wide variety of materiality and expression and form, and we're taking cues from all of these in different ways. Next slide. This is a elevation of the existing building on the top, which shows the relationships, if you're kind of looking south on St. Botolph, of the existing relationship with the building, the Beaufront buildings that are along Mass Ave. And then the lower image is kind of an outline of the mass of our proposed building. And this next slide will show looking across the street at the NEC, the future Huntington Tower, as well as the variety of scales and elements that work on the opposite of the street that we'll be responding to contextually. Next. So this is back to that same view that we showed the existing, but showing the proposed massing of the building. The unique piece about this building that is really driving some of the architectural massing and expression is not only is it an event center or arena, it's really a 365 destination. It is on the edge of campus. That was part of that last discussion about being an edge building and being kind of a gateway to and arrival to building. So this corner of St. Botolph and Gainsborough becomes really important as that kind of ending point, if you will, of that pedestrian movement through campus and arriving at this building. And we think there's a couple opportunities there to kind of, if you will, get right some of these pedestrian relationships and really have this building have a presence on that corner, and also help foster more pedestrian movement in relationship to those T improvements that are happening on that Mass Ave T. Next slide. The building itself, due to the ambitious kind of programmatic nature that's within it, can have an opportunity to be a very ambitious net zero energy carbon building, using some of the waste heat and other things that would be within the building to reuse those, turn that into useful energy, capture some of that energy, and reuse it within the building. So those are some of the strategies. We can get into that in any more detail. The next slide. Some of the massing of the building, and this gets back to how we kind of sculpted the ground plane. The first slide, or the first image on this slide to the left, is elevating as much of the program as we could to an upper level, providing more ground plane that's shown here in green around the building to create both entry and queuing on game days, but also places to gather and have social activity with the building, but also on the upper level of the building, pulling back the mass to create a sense of relief as this building kind of steps vertically. Next slide. We are incorporating photovoltaics on the top of the roof, but the distribution of opportunities where we can have glazing related to that step massing through the building will be important, to also include natural light, but also views out, and to be a much more active building than what the current Matthews Arena is today. The curvilinear forms are really playing off of both the softening of the corners and trying to mitigate some of the scale, but also a big theme in the building is kind of movement on display. And that's something that weaves both inside and outside of the building. Next. From a programmatic standpoint, and this gets back to kind of our approach or our tagline for the building, about a 365 building. The green areas that you see in the building are primarily recreation. The building is not only an arena, a community, a campus building, but also a year-round, day-long recreation destination for campus on this edge of campus. So those three components, rec, events, and athletic spaces, are the components that make up the building, and that also gets expressed in some of the elevations you'll see. Next. And then the section, this is a transverse section, St. Botolph on the left-hand side, the MBTA tracks on the right, looks at how we've kind of masked the building, trying to introduce natural light, but also opening up the facade and trying to introduce glazing where we can, out to St. Botolph and out to the street, so there's views into and out of the building. Next.
Can folks hear me okay? Can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you. So now we're spinning around and going up, and now this is the first time we're showing you the plan view of the footprint of the building. So just to orient everyone, St. Botolph is running along horizontally at the top of the page. Gainsborough's on our left. That means Mass Ave is on our right, and the MBTA and is to the kind of south portion of the page. So what we've been looking at from the streetscape and landscape program for the project are really kind of three different needs of the plaza. So we have something along St. Botolph in a very linear fashion. We have the main entry plaza at number 2 and the rec entry at number 3. And these are the three main doors. There's a lot of movement going in and out of the building. And so really to highlight the corner, the main entry plaza is on the corner of Gainsborough and St. Botolph. That's where most people will come and go. The rec entry, which is a little bit further down, closer to the T there at number 3, that's where students can come and they go right to the recreational facilities above. So it's a little bit of a separate use in that entry. And then on the St. Botolph side of things, that's where we have the entry kind of game day and student athlete access. So if we go to the next slide, what the landscape really needs to do is figure out how to work most importantly on an everyday basis, right? So that we can get, clear visibility, things feel open and connected, but people know where they're supposed to go in these various doors. And then on events and game days, the landscape also needs to be able to support many people queuing out there on these corner streets, Gainsborough, and then along St. Botolph where student entry will come in. So those are the challenges that have been kind of presented to us with the program of the building and how it sits on the site. And if we go to the next slide, we really started to look at, I think what Stephen just said, movement on display, how that can really deploy in the landscape as well. So we start to see paving patterns, and you will see, Stephen will be showing some more images that have the building's overhangs pretty clearly shown. They're almost at the property line, and the property line here is shown in pink. So we have deep overhangs, which we think are actually incredible public amenities on the project, but it also means there's a lot of space that's underneath those areas. So we have a lot of plaza hardscape that's really trying to provide hierarchies to the various doors. And not only were we inspired by the building forms, but also kind of the diagram of transit maps and something that will provide some wayfinding so that we can really start to reinforce how and where people can access, and then at the same time where that queuing can play in. And what we really like about this scheme is that we're providing custom design that's complementary to the work that the NEC has done across the street. Whereas, everything we're doing here is sort of specific to athletics in an abstracted fashion, in a similar way that the streetscape along the north side of the street there is specific to music. So it's really creating this very dynamic public streetscape along St. Botolph and Gainsborough. So we want to be complementary, and it adds to the vibrancy of this location. If you go to the next slide, we do have, we exceed complete streets. This is a really important thing that we've been studying this whole time. So on St. Botolph, I think one of the important things we really want to look at is accessibility to all, and really creating this public realm space that does not exist there now. So in the backside from the pink line to the right, we have overhang space. That's an all-weather access area with some fixed furnishings, lots of inviting spaces. But currently we're really looking at a parking lot on both sides of the street. We know that we will have to choose our street trees in a really careful fashion. So that's what we've been looking at here too. Please remember, we're just in SD, and I've already been writing down other trees that might work better for the Columbia Forum. But we're also looking at maybe on St. Botolph and Gainsborough, it's not the regular rhythm of street trees, that we start to gang them in certain places. So we have more room types that will reinforce some of the program, and then we have porosity and openness in other spaces. So if we
Lynn,
go,
I just wanted to flag the time for you. That's 10 minutes.
okay, great. I guess I'll stop
I
there.
think we'll just click ahead maybe just to the massing.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off abruptly. Just wanted to give you the flag that you
I'll
hit 10
fly through
minutes.
these really quickly. So elevation, St. Botolph Street elevation looking south. Key piece with this is we are using some of the cues from the surrounding context and proposing a brick building, an iron spot that ties into some of the historic kind of gray brick around campus. Thank you, Corey. And looking at the building, really kind of distributed into 3 zones, kind of the base, there is a middle area, and then a top area. There's actually 5 levels within the building, but simplifying it in those zones, and then using patterning within the brick to highlight those zones and distributing glazing, more glazing as it goes down to the building to the street front. Next. As we move around the building, this is the main entry off of that corner of Gainsborough and St. Botolph that Lynn was speaking to, kind of the cantilevered covered area at the main entry. That is really trying to tie into the T-stop development, the paving that has been done, the MEC, all the way down to from this intersection down to Huntington. Next. And then kind of a closer in view of some of the late day sun that would come in and kind of light this area, and also create on a game day a area for queuing that can be organized through the furniture, but on non-game days a social destination and part of that edge kind of district on campus. Next. As we move around the building, this is probably the one we're working on the most, continuing to study the most. It's a challenging elevation. It's a large elevation that's seen in the distance. This is a view kind of hovering over the T, looking back towards down Gainsborough off your left, down to Huntington Ave, louvers, windows, coordinating those and looking at different ways to break down the massing of the scale and possibly include some branding and signage on that facade. Next, please. And in the massing, you can see how the building actually steps back on the rooftop from the corners to create a bit of relief and scale breakdown. This is looking from Mass Ave. This is that secondary entry, almost exactly at the same spot that the current entry is. The alleyway is right to the left of that entry. You zoom in one more time. This is moving up to that entry. And what we're thinking about right now is that facade that runs down St. Botolph to be an interactive display that can talk about the history of the site and look at ways of telling the story of all the amazing events that have happened here. And I think this is obviously just in its very infancy, so we can turn it over to comments.
Thank you to the Northeastern team. And I think that we probably have some urban design slides before we jump in as commissioners. Is that you, Scott?
Yes, hi, thank you so much. So just a little sort of note. I've taken this project over from Elizabeth Stiffel, so I've just recently seen it. So I am evaluating the drawings very freshly, as I think the commissioners are, and these are my comments. How is the ground floor of the arena activated programmatically where it interfaces with the campus? I think it should be a very public interface at those moments, both at the Mass Ave side and also at the Northeastern side. How does this building, because it's seen from outside the campus, how does it signify that it's a part of the Northeastern campus? And the last piece, how does the site plan support and contribute to the public realm, but particularly at the end of Gainsborough Street? Could that potentially become a pedestrian-only zone as you cross the bridge, that goes over the T, a place that I've used so many times when I lived in the South End? So an amazing site, an incredible opportunity, and lots of chances to make this building extraordinary. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. Stephen, can you pull up one of your renderings or a site plan or something, just so commissioners have a visual? That would be great.
Sure, I think Corey has it.
Yep. Oh, thank you, Corey. Perfect. David Hassan.
Well, thank you for the presentation, and I think it looks like a very exciting piece of program and a really, I think it's a very clever solution in many ways. I'm going to comment on two things. One is the materiality. I do have to say that I find this building, I appreciate the fact that you've chosen brick, but everything about the renderings and everything, the way the building is represented, makes it look and feel like a cool metal building. And I want to understand why. This is adjacent to, the largest Victorian historic district in the United States, red brick. I'm not suggesting that it be a red brick building, but this contrast feels very striking and, to me, harsh. I also think that by the way, I like the building, the sculpting of the building and the shaping of the building a great deal. This is really a focus on the color and materiality of the building. And I think it could be solved by simply slightly even different choice. The other thing is that Boston is a gray city. It's a rainy city. And I think that on one hand, all the covered spaces that you're creating are going to offer a fantastic spillover effect, places to gather, places to compose yourself as you're leaving a facility when it's snowing or raining, or creating transition zones. And so I really applaud that notion of carving out and creating space. But those spaces too feel very cold. And I think that when I look at those views, one of the first things I wanted to see was, how are you treating the ceilings? How are you treating those spaces that are underneath? What do they feel like? And it looks like they're also gray and metal, So I'm really liking the project, but I'm having a kind of a rather visceral reaction to the materiality of it. So I'd like to understand really, by the way, the detailing that you're suggesting, everything looks fantastic, but I'd really like to understand that aspect of it and how it, as someone who used to live on St. Botolph Street down the street, what's it going to feel like to walk down that very beautiful historic street and into the campus, which, as Scott pointed out, we want to feel more connected and more public. Does this building suggest, with its coverings and its wide sidewalks, like, yes, come through here, or does it suggest through its materiality a message that says, the south end stops, boom, at the back of that red brick row house building, and this is a different place? So that's just something I'd like to talk about a little bit more. I'd also like to understand where this building is seen from other parts of the neighborhood. So for example, over on Columbus Avenue, looking back across those spaces down Gainsborough Street, what do I see? So if you could provide us with more views from around the site, where the public is more likely to be hanging out, or from down Huntington even, past the conservatory, into that street, those would be, rather than the views that are like right up tight against the building, I would find that super helpful in subcommittee. So thank you.
Thanks, David. A lot of really good comments there. Jonathan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. And yeah, I agree with a lot of what David just said. And it's a really exciting project. I think there's a lot about the massing and the sort of section diagrams that are really exciting to see. I think I'm kind of want to take a step back. And for me, I want to understand better what is kind of the story or the generative idea. And I know I had a similar comment for the IMP, but I think in looking at how this presentation was presented, it kind of nibbled around a lot of discussion of what is the sort of generative thrust of the design. I think, some of the conversations are before around, well, it's the idea of like we're creating an icon here. I think, what does that kind of mean? This isn't meant to be kind of a hot take, but arenas are kind of like cathedrals of our time. So what does it mean for this thing to be a bold figure, and what are the sort of rules of its making that we can then use to help push it further and understand how, what are these design moves in service to? I think I think a lot of the moves, like the sculpting, the brick detailing, I think a lot of the moves are smart, but I guess I want to understand what are they ultimately kind of in service to as the sort of, again, generative force of the project. I think at the beginning here, you had some exciting slides around, documenting the existing building and kind of a timeline of events that happened here. I guess I was hopeful that there'd be some more intentional attitude about what does that history mean to this new building, without being overly literal. Obviously, how does that become a thing that's important to the spirit of this place? I'd love to think about that beyond just an applique on the curtain wall. But again, a lot of really exciting things. I think looking into subcommittee, I think understanding the approach, renderings from street level, kind of coming at this thing from every way. I mean, again, I think the idea that this building is a gateway is important to understand what this means, to feel like you are entering Northeastern. Also thinking about those views, what does this feel like on game day versus, on every day? I think there was some exciting comments being made about through the landscape discussion around how this sort of feels and programmatically works. I guess I want to sort of understand that experientially and kind of a rendering. And even with those same plans, zooming out and showing those plans with more context is sort of understanding how this plugs into the city and plugs into Northeastern. And maybe the last comment here, again, picking up on something David said, I think the moment of entry itself also feels a little squat underneath the weight of this building, especially when this thing is rendered in brick. I guess I want to think about how we make sure that entrance moment feels like upon arrival, inviting and of a scale that feels, again, civic, public, welcoming. But all that said, I am really excited. A lot of exciting things here to chew on in subcommittee.
Jonathan, thanks for those comments. Kathy.
Thank you. I will also echo some of what my fellow commissioners have already stated, chief among them a sort of explanation of materials and color choices. But I'm something that Jonathan said reinforced a thought I had earlier, which is to really understand how this will be used, given the rich history of Matthews as more than just a Northeastern serving space. Is that still the intention here? Is this predominantly going to be an athletic university serving facility? If it is going to be a public space, what does that, I think that the public approach, the better understanding of this within the larger pedestrian radius is going to be a little bit more important. I'm also intrigued by your reference to telling the story of what previous meetings happened in this space that were important to the broader life of the city, and how you will tell that. I don't want you to, I'm not interested in reading a narrative, but I'm curious how, rather than a passing reference to how you will do that, more of a system, some sense, more of an explanation of how you might go about that, so that there is both a continuity, not just for Bostonians who might have come here in the past or have some memory of it, but for the students to also know that story as well. I'm curious, given the colors, the shape of this building, the different planes of the building, how this might appear at nighttime, and if you have any thoughts around how lighting might accent some of that. It seems to me there's a huge opportunity for that, but it is very close to neighbors, so that's, I guess, something to consider. And I am interested in the immediate abutting neighborhood view. What are they seeing out the window? Are those your buildings at Northeastern, or are those private? I don't know, but it's awfully close, and I guess I'm wondering what the new view will be that close, despite the generous increase in space that you've offered. But I'll leave it there and say that I'm just very interested in hearing how this has evolved and how it will continue to exude that spirit of gathering for the broader city, not just Northeastern.
just Kathy, to respond to your question, the row houses are not Northeastern University on the left. Gainsborough Garage on the right side of the page, though, is our facility.
Great, thanks.
Kathy, thanks for those comments. Bill? I think you're on mute, Bill.
A little computer trouble here. Thank you. I'm just going to take one issue that has come up a couple times, and I'm going to phrase it, how do we know that this is an athletic building? In other words, as you look at it, where do you get that sense of excitement, movement, views through the building, all of that? And it may very well be in your plans, but I worry that this view of St. Botolph and the Gainsborough view may look like just a lobby to a multifunctional building and not generate that kind of excitement about athletics. And someone, whether it was Kathy or someone else, said, in a sense, is the building kind of too low to the ground and not capturing a bit about the airspace that those athletic facilities require. So it's in the same vein as some of the other questions, but as I look at the building right now, it doesn't read out to me as athletic or movement, and so I'm sure you have thought about this, and we'll welcome that in committee.
Thank you, Bill. Laura?
Boy, this is one of those really tough sites for landscape where you have a building that, by virtue of its use has to have a pretty large footprint. And while I appreciate the floor at the ground level actually being pushed up and then glass, I still wonder, is this going to be a destination place? And I understand it gets, daily use and, use during games. But what will draw you here and what would make you stay? I'm not so sure that those connections that you've talked about, I'm not convinced that those connections exist. And so it would be great to see what the relationship is of this site to pedestrian corridors on the campus or other streetscapes or something that will give us a clue for that. And this is such a big building. Is there something from a distance that would draw you to come and see this this landscape and to, basically be here? Is there activity that you can see? Is there something with light? Somebody mentioned something on the ceiling. What is the surprise when you get there? I think that you really need to make, if you intend to make this someplace, a landscape that is special on campus, it needs more than benches and trees. I don't know what that is, but I know that that's not going to be enough to really activate this edge. And Lynn, you're just so thoughtful about what you've done, but I think that sort of working with the architects a little bit more to give you some more opportunities to make a great landscape would be important. So I think that's it, but thank you very much. It's a fascinating project, and thanks to fellow commissioners, really great comments all around. And by the way, I love that iron spot brick, but I'm not so sure it goes here.
I don't think our renderings are doing us any favors right now for what that's worth.
Yeah,
but,
probably not.
And it's something we talked about. We knew it coming into this presentation that would be an issue, and we're not happy with how it's being represented. And we're still studying the variety of the bricks and the samples and starting to pull those together. So.
Well, maybe I'll start my comments with that, Stephen. I share some of the concerns, and you're right. I mean, may just be a rendering style, but it looks very reflective and very flat. And I question this idea of the iron spot just because I think it will be a very, very gray building, despite all of the beautiful detailing that I'm sure you'll be adding to the building as you study it further. So that was one of my comments. A couple of others. So I'm really curious to understand this building within its immediate context, and Kathy noted this. For instance, I'm curious if the edges of the building align or don't align with adjacent buildings, and if those intentional choices to not align, which I think is what's happening because you're giving us a very generous sidewalk on St. Botolph, you know, those intentional decisions to not align, you know, what does that create for us in terms of opportunity or a public gesture? So I'd love to learn more about that. And also, I think one of the pieces that rides along with, you know, is this building set back or proud of its adjacent buildings, is kind of just the philosophy around the eased corners. Stephen, I really like this building. The massing is very elegant. I like the changes of level. I think that in terms of an urban design diagram, these ideas that you and Lynn talked about with the multiple entries and the idea that you'll have kind of a visual cue about where those entries will be, and you're tying it into where people will line up for events, all makes a lot of sense. But I'm you know, curious how those can be strengthened particularly within the context. Two more comments. One is about the MBTA. So in addition to just understanding how this sits in its site, I'm really curious about any MBTA plans because your whole side of your building rides along that. And so you'll have this facade that will be seen from, you know, the train or from the walls of the train or something. And so I'd love to understand that. And also kind of what does this bridge look like, the Gainsborough Bridge? And are there plans within part of the master plan? Corey, this is probably a question for you and Victoria, but are there plans to actually create that bridge as a real element of the campus? And what does it tie into? I love this idea that maybe this becomes a pedestrian street, Gainsborough, during this block. And then the last is a detail, but it gets back to what Marianne talked about in the IMP presentation, where one of the principles is about accessibility. And I was just looking at the section, Stephen, that you presented, and the idea that you come in the lobby and then you go up and then you come back down to the arena, and it looked like there were ramps through one of the diagrams. Yes, this one. And then it looked like in one of the renderings, you know, you're seeing a ramp that zips up along the side of one of the long facades. And so I think just understanding how accessibility works here, as well as kind of the graciousness of these entries for creating accessibility, would be really important. I don't see any more hands. So
Linda, could I just throw in one thing? You know, at the Marino Center, I believe there's like food service, and you couldn't go into the courtyard, and it actually feels very public and inviting. That's like a Northeastern building that I've engaged with as a member of the public without having necessarily business at Northeastern. And I have to believe that all the people using all these facilities are going to need sport drinks and coffee and all the rest of it. I would love to know if there is some similar way of engaging with the public at the lobby level with whatever kind of food service or that might be offered in this building. And I think it might be a way of animating one of these understory zones with something, you know, that feels genuinely public, maybe biased to Gainsborough Street, maybe biased to Mass Ave. I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot of food stuff on Mass Ave. Maybe it needs to be more biased to Gainsborough. But so I'm curious about those moments of interaction where I might be walking by and, you know, how can I interface with this building? So I just wanted to toss that in there as maybe something to understand as we go into subcommittee.
Thanks, Steve.
Sorry, Linda, for the follow-up, but
no worries. We all may be needing some sports drinks in a few more minutes.
yes, I'm getting a little loopy.
We'll take Laura, maybe a quick comment from you, and then let's see if we've got some public comment.
Yep, very quick. And it's sort of building off of something that Bill said, and that is motion. And, you know, is there opportunity in these deep overhangs to have, you know, some kind of boxed activity, meaning you're watching, you are, when you're a pedestrian on the, in the landscape, is there something to watch? Like, can there be motion where you can come and just watch, right? You don't even have to, we don't need to sell anything to anybody, you know, just come and watch handball or, you know, something in these athletic rooms that could be, you know, active at night. And anyway, I'm done. We'll leave it at that.
Well, I think it's a good comment to close on this idea of transparency and activity that, you know, you're at the edge of the campus, but it's also a gateway to your campus. And so how can that be something really vibrant? Christina, do we have any public comment?
I feel like an airline attendant every time I do this. At this time, we'd like to invite any members of the public in attendance who may wish to contribute public testimony to raise your digital hand, and staff will call on you. If you're calling in by phone, press the number 9 on your dial pad to activate the raised hand function, and dial 6 to mute and unmute yourself. Please state your name and any relevant project affiliation information, and please keep your comments to 2 minutes. Commissioners, at this time, I see no hands raised.
Well, your seat backs can also be used as a flotation device.
There's an exit located behind in the aft.
So I'll make a motion to send this to subcommittee so that I don't have to jump out of the plane.
Second.
Thank you. All right. All in favor, please say aye. Jonathan Evans.
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith.
Aye.
David Haseen.
Aye.
Kathy Kotorides.
Aye.
Bill Ron.
Aye.
Laura Solano.
Aye.
And myself, Linda Eastley. We will see you at subcommittee.
Right.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for staying late.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Can we adjourn?
We have one more, yes, we have one more thing to do, which is to adjourn. Is there a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
I see a collective second of like 6 people. All in favor, say aye. Jonathan Evans.
Aye.
Shauna Gilly-Smith.
Aye.
David Haseen.
Aye.
Kathy Kotorides.
Aye.
Bill Ron.
Aye.
Laura Solano.
Aye.
Kirk Sykes. Oh, Kirk recused himself. And myself, Linda Eastley. We are adjourned. Thank you all for your patience tonight.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Next
Thank
time.
you.